For years, my son and his wife looked down on me. They thought I was a helpless old man they could toss aside whenever they pleased. When they handed me an eviction notice for my own home, claiming I would not survive a single week without their charity, something inside me snapped. I did not just survive, I thrived. I took everything they built and turned it to my absolute advantage. The very empire they thought was theirs became the foundation of my own success. And they had absolutely no idea what was coming. My name is Garrett Crawford. I am 69 years old, and what I am about to tell you will change how you look at the people closest to you. Before I reveal how I dismantled my son's life piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an ungrateful family member a lesson they will never forget. The sharp, aggressive slap of heavy paper hitting my worn oak kitchen table broke the morning silence. I did not flinch. I slowly raised my eyes from my steaming black coffee to look directly at my daughter-in-law, Megan. She stood there in her immaculate, custom-tailored beige suit, her posture rigid with an arrogant superiority she wore like a heavy crown. Her perfectly manicured finger tapped aggressively on the top page of the legal document she had just thrown down. It was an official eviction notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. The house I had lived in for over 4 decades, the very kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals and washed thousands of dishes, was being ripped away from me with a single sheet of paper. Megan crossed her arms, a cold, calculated smirk playing on her lips. She did not see a father-in-law sitting across from her. She saw an inconvenience, an old retired carpenter taking up space on a highly valuable piece of real estate. She spoke with a voice dripping in fake sympathy, the exact kind of condescending tone you would use to scold a disobedient toddler. "It is time to finally face reality, Garrett," she said, her eyes scanning my simple faded plaid shirt with utter disdain. "You are getting far too old to manage this property on your own. Aaron and I have made an executive decision for the family. We are liquidating this asset today. You need to start packing your bags right now." My gaze shifted slowly from Megan's triumphant face to the bottom of the eviction notice. There, etched in bold black ink, was my son Aaron's signature. The sharp curves and rigid lines of his handwriting felt like a physical, heavy blow to the center of my chest. Aaron was my only child. When he turned 18, I wanted to give him a massive head start in a world that is rarely kind to young black men. I had spent 30 agonizing years breaking my back on demanding construction sites, breathing in toxic drywall dust, and fiercely saving every single extra dime I earned. I used my entire life savings to buy the deed to this exact plot of land, putting it completely in Aaron's name. It was supposed to be his permanent safety net, a solid foundation for his future. I had built this small, sturdy house with my own 2 calloused hands, framing the walls and laying every shingle on the roof, trusting completely that my boy would honor that massive sacrifice. Now at 36 years old, playing the role of the hotshot CEO of a rising tech company, he was using that very gift as a sharp weapon to render me completely homeless. The profound, suffocating betrayal settled heavy and cold in my stomach. The boy I had patiently taught to hold a hammer, the son I had fiercely protected from every storm, had signed away my sanctuary without a second thought. Aaron stood leaning awkwardly against the kitchen doorframe. He wore a custom navy suit and kept his eyes glued to his expensive smartphone, desperately refusing to meet my gaze. He looked exactly like a stranger. The proud son I raised would have looked me squarely in the eye. This man standing in my kitchen was a coward hiding behind a glowing screen. "Come on, Dad," Aaron said, finally glancing up for a fraction of a second before looking away again. "Try to understand the macroeconomics of the situation here. Apex Innovations is scaling rapidly right now. We are in the middle of a massive, aggressive market expansion, and we desperately need liquid assets to leverage our upcoming venture rounds. This land is dead capital. Sitting on it is fiscally irresponsible, and frankly, it is holding back our quarterly projections." He spoke entirely in empty corporate buzzwords, recklessly throwing around terms like liquid assets and leverage to justify throwing his elderly father onto the freezing street. He sounded heavily rehearsed, as if Megan had drilled these exact lines into his head during their morning commute. I stayed perfectly still, letting his pathetic, hollow excuses hang in the quiet air of my kitchen. Seeing my silence, Megan stepped closer, slamming her hands flat on the table. She hated when I did not react. She desperately wanted me to beg. "Do not look at him like that, Garrett," she snapped, her voice rising in a shrill pitch. "Aaron is a CEO. He is making the tough, necessary calls that you never had the stomach for. You have lived in this rundown shack for years, doing absolutely nothing with your life while we are out there building a massive legacy. We are not a charity for retired handymen. You should be thanking us on your knees. We already found a state-funded assisted living facility across town for you. It is cheap, but it covers the bare basics. That is exactly where someone like you belongs. You honestly think you can survive out here on your own?" She laughed, a harsh, grating sound that bounced aggressively off the kitchen walls. "Let us be brutally honest, old man. You are absolutely nothing without our handouts. You do not have the money, the brains, or the stamina to last a single week out there without Aaron and me managing your pathetic life. You are a massive burden to us. We are just cutting the dead weight before it sinks our company." Her insults were specifically designed to break me down completely, to reduce me to a helpless, weeping victim. She genuinely thought I was a poor, uneducated laborer who had blindly stumbled through life. She truly believed her corporate title made her a god. I let her finish her unhinged rant. I let her bask in her entirely false sense of superiority. Megan reached aggressively into her expensive designer handbag and pulled out a small, worn blue booklet. It was my personal savings passbook. A few months ago, under the deceptive guise of helping me organize my complex retirement taxes, she had insisted on holding on to it for safekeeping. I had willingly let her, playing the part of the confused aging father perfectly, to see how far she would go. She tossed the booklet onto the table with a flick of her wrist. It slid across the smooth wood and stopped right next to my coffee mug. "Take your little pennies and go," Megan sneered, turning swiftly on her heel toward the front door. "We expect you completely out by the end of the month." Aaron did not say a single word of goodbye. He simply followed his wife out the door like an obedient dog, eager to escape the suffocating weight of his own massive guilt. The heavy front door slammed shut violently, rattling the picture frames on the living room wall. I sat completely alone in the quiet kitchen. I picked up the blue passbook and flipped it open to the most recent transaction page. I fully expected to see my modest safety net of $20,000. Instead, my eyes locked onto a long, terrifying row of zeros. The balance had been completely wiped out. Every single dollar of my emergency cash had vanished without a trace, transferred out through a series of unauthorized withdrawals. They had not just served me an eviction notice. They had actively robbed me blind to ensure I had nowhere to go. I slowly closed the booklet. A deep, cold calm washed over me. I did not waste a single second grieving over their cruelty. I grabbed my keys, got into my old, reliable pickup truck, and drove straight into the heart of the downtown business district. The towering glass and steel structure housing Apex Innovations loomed ahead, reflecting the cold morning sun. I parked and walked purposefully through the massive revolving doors, the heavy blue savings passbook gripped tightly in my right hand. The lobby was a sprawling monument to corporate excess, filled with minimalist leather furniture and people rushing around in expensive tailored suits. I marched directly toward the security turnstiles, my eyes locked aggressively on the sleek silver elevator banks. Right at that exact moment, the elevator doors slid open and Aaron stepped out, holding a digital tablet. He looked up, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock as he registered my presence. The hotshot tech CEO suddenly looked exactly like a terrified little boy caught stealing from a candy jar. I took a firm, deliberate step forward, raising the empty bank book so he could clearly see exactly why I was there. Instead of facing me like a grown man, Aaron took a quick, panicked step backward. He frantically waved his hand in the air, catching the attention of two massive men in dark security uniforms. He pointed a trembling finger directly at me, his own father, and muttered something frantic to the guards. Before I could even speak his name aloud, the two men moved swiftly to block my path, crossing their thick, muscular arms to form an impenetrable human wall between my cowardly son and me. As the guards stood firmly in my way, my heavy work boots planted solidly on the pristine Italian marble floor, a sudden wave of bitter, agonizing nostalgia washed over me. I looked down at the polished stone beneath my feet and remembered exactly what lay buried deep beneath it. 30 years ago, this glamorous lobby was absolutely nothing but a massive pit of raw dirt and heavy rebar. I was 39 years old, working grueling 14-hour shifts in the blistering summer heat. I was the only black contractor on the entire foundation crew for this development. The site managers treated me with blatant disrespect, constantly doubting my measurements and tossing racial slurs behind my back when they thought I could not hear them. But I endured every single insult with quiet dignity. I poured the concrete for this very foundation with my own sweat and blood, ensuring the structural integrity of a building that would one day house millionaires. I swallowed my immense pride back then just to put warm food on Aaron's plate and buy him the expensive computer equipment that ultimately launched his entire tech career. Now history was cruelly repeating itself on the exact same ground. The blatant disrespect, the physical exclusion, the horrible feeling of being treated like a dangerous outsider. Only this time, the person ordering my removal was not a racist site foreman. It was the son I had sacrificed my own physical health to raise. The agonizing irony tasted like cold ash in my mouth. Before the security guards could aggressively lay their hands on my shoulders, the sharp clicking of expensive high heels echoed loudly across the marble floor. Megan strode out from the elevators, her eyes narrowing dangerously as she took in the tense scene. She immediately recognized the massive threat I posed to their carefully curated public image. The sprawling lobby was filled with Apex Innovations employees, wealthy investors, and potential clients. Megan knew she had to aggressively control the narrative instantly. She walked right up to the security perimeter, putting on a flawless theatrical mask of deep familial concern. She clasped her hands tightly to her chest and spoke in a loud, carrying voice, intentionally ensuring every single person in the vicinity could hear her clearly. "Garrett, you absolutely cannot keep doing this," she cried out, her voice dripping with fake, desperate distress. "We have talked about this wandering off. You are supposed to be resting safely at home." The employees in the lobby stopped dead in their tracks and stared, whispering quietly to each other. I held up the blue passbook, my voice steady, calm, and dangerously low. "Where is my $20,000, Megan? Tell me exactly why my emergency funds were completely drained without my authorization." Megan let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, shaking her head sadly as if dealing with a tragic clinical patient. She turned slightly toward the gathering crowd, playing her victim role to absolute perfection. "Garrett, please, your dementia is getting significantly worse by the day," she proclaimed, wiping an imaginary tear from her eye. "You know exactly where that money went. Aaron and I had to empty that account to pay for your massive medical bills. Those expensive neurological treatments and the 24-hour in-home care nurses cost an absolute fortune. We are trying everything in our power to help you, but you constantly refuse to take your medication." She was actively gaslighting me in front of 50 strangers. There were absolutely no medical bills. I had not seen a neurologist in my entire life, and I was in perfect physical health. She was deliberately assassinating my character, painting me as a confused, aggressive old man suffering from severe cognitive decline. I saw the pitying looks from the young tech workers around the lobby. They were buying her performance completely. I could have yelled. I could have screamed the undeniable truth and called her a thief in front of everyone. But my decades of surviving in a hostile corporate world had taught me a vital lesson. Uncontrolled anger is exactly what your enemies desperately want to see. If I raised my voice, I would only prove her fake medical diagnosis right. I would hand them the exact legal ammunition they desperately needed to lock me away in a facility. So I simply stared at her. I looked deep into her cold, lying eyes, letting her know silently that she had just made the biggest mistake of her miserable life. Megan gestured sharply to the security guards. "Please escort my father-in-law outside safely before he hurts himself," she commanded with sickening fake sympathy. The two massive guards placed their heavy hands on my shoulders and physically pushed me toward the revolving doors. I did not resist them. I walked out into the biting wind of the busy city street, the heavy glass doors sealing shut behind me, locking me out of the building, resting on my own concrete foundation. I stood on the sidewalk, adjusting my jacket, feeling the sharp sting of utter public humiliation. Just as I took a deep breath to steady myself, my cell phone began to vibrate aggressively in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the name Harper Quinn flashing on the bright screen. Harper was a brilliant 45-year-old African-American attorney. She was sharp, ruthless, and fiercely loyal to me. She was also the lead legal counsel for Crawford Holdings, my secretly owned commercial real estate empire. I answered the call immediately. "Garrett, we have a massive legal problem," Harper said, her usually calm professional voice laced with urgent tension. "I was just reviewing the commercial banking alerts for the district. Aaron just submitted a massive commercial loan application to aggressively leverage Apex Innovations. He is trying to secure a highly risky multi-million-dollar credit line." I frowned, watching the sleek cars pass by on the busy street. "Why are you calling me about this, Harper? Let the fool drown himself in corporate debt." Because, Garrett, she replied, taking a sharp breath, he did not just use his company as collateral. He listed you as the primary financial guarantor. He completely forged your signature on the federal loan documents. I did not go back to my empty house. I drove straight to the sleek downtown offices of Crawford Holdings, taking the secure private elevator directly to the executive top floor. Harper Quinn was already waiting for me in her expansive glass-walled office. She did not waste time with basic pleasantries or small talk. As soon as I sat down heavily in the leather chair opposite her massive mahogany desk, she slid a thick manila folder across the polished surface. I opened it slowly. There, printed on the dotted line of a highly complex, multi-million-dollar commercial loan application, was my name. The signature was a highly sophisticated forgery mimicking the precise loops and slants of my handwriting with terrifying accuracy. Aaron had obviously spent hours practicing it, carefully studying my old checks to perfect his financial theft. Harper leaned forward, her sharp eyes furious behind her designer glasses. "Garrett, this is a clear-cut federal crime," she stated firmly, tapping a manicured finger aggressively on the fraudulent ink. "We need to involve the severe authorities right now. I have the chief of police on speed dial. We can have Aaron arrested for massive financial fraud and deliberate identity theft before the banks even close their doors today." He crossed a massive legal line that carries serious prison time. I stared at the forged signature, feeling the last remaining threads of my paternal affection snap completely in half. My own flesh and blood was entirely willing to risk sending me to a harsh federal prison just to secure a desperate cash injection for his failing tech company. I slowly closed the folder and pushed it back toward Harper. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "We are absolutely not calling the police." Harper looked at me as if I had completely lost my mind. She opened her mouth to argue loudly, but I raised a firm hand to silence her protests. To the outside world, and especially to my highly arrogant son and his terribly snobby wife, I was absolutely nothing but a washed-up, retired carpenter scraping by on a meager state pension. But what Aaron completely failed to realize was that those decades of grueling construction work had given me an unparalleled, brutal education in commercial real estate. Every single time a wealthy developer went bankrupt, or a prime commercial building went into sudden foreclosure during the various market crashes, I was right there waiting in the shadows. I quietly bought up distressed properties for pennies on the dollar, relentlessly renovating them with my own two hands and flipping them into highly lucrative commercial spaces. Over the past 20 grueling years, I had built an absolute titan of a real estate empire completely from the dark shadows. Crawford Holdings was my silent masterpiece, an invisible corporate giant that owned some of the most expensive and highly sought-after office buildings in the entire state. And the absolute most delicious piece of poetic irony in this entire miserable situation was the very building Aaron and Megan occupied. The luxurious, towering glass structure where Megan had just publicly humiliated me in the lobby, where Aaron was desperately trying to project the fake image of a tech billionaire, belonged entirely and exclusively to me. They were paying exorbitant monthly rent directly into my corporate accounts without having the slightest clue that their deeply despised father-in-law was their actual landlord. "Garrett, you cannot possibly let him get away with this blatant felony," Harper insisted, her voice tight with intense professional frustration. "If he inevitably defaults on this massive, impossible loan, the aggressive creditors will absolutely come after your personal assets. He is using your pristine credit score to fund a rapidly sinking ship." I leaned back in my chair, a cold, calculated strategy forming perfectly and vividly in my mind. "I am not letting him get away with anything, Harper. I am simply choosing my own precise method of execution. Calling the police right now would only give him a golden chance to play the helpless victim. Megan would immediately spin a tragic public relations story about a confused, senile father trying to maliciously ruin his highly successful son. I want to hit them where it will actually destroy their massive egos. I want their entire company." Harper paused, her sharp legal mind instantly catching up to my dark train of thought. "You want to approve the forged loan?" she asked, her eyes narrowing with sudden intense realization. I nodded slowly. "Aaron is frantically applying for this desperate credit line through a series of obscure shadow lenders because the major credible banks have already violently rejected his terrible financials. I want Crawford Holdings to secretly step in and acquire the debt completely. Approve his multi-million-dollar loan application immediately today. Fund his pathetic little tech company using my own money, but I want you to bury a highly specific acceleration clause incredibly deep inside the endless boring pages of the corporate contract. I leaned forward, resting my forearms heavily on the desk. Draft a predatory, ruthless default condition. If Apex Innovations misses a single payment or is late by a mere fraction of a second, I want the absolute legal right to instantly seize all of their corporate assets. I want their intellectual property, their expensive server networks, their private client lists, and the immediate unceremonious eviction of their headquarters. I want the total legal power to lock the glass doors to that tower and take absolutely everything they have ever built. Harper smiled, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her face. It was the exact terrifying smile that made her the most feared and respected corporate attorney in the city. She pulled a fresh notepad toward her and swiftly uncapped her expensive pen. It is completely ruthless, Garrett. It is a financial death trap perfectly disguised as a corporate lifeline. If they fail to read the fine print, and we both know Aaron is far too arrogant and desperate to read a 100-page contract, they will literally be signing their entire company over to you. Do it, I commanded, my voice devoid of any remaining warmth. They arrogantly told me I could not survive a week without them. Let us see exactly how they handle losing their entire empire in a single day. Make the terms completely airtight. I do not want them to have a single microscopic legal loophole to crawl out of when the steel trap snaps shut. Harper swiftly picked up her heavy metal corporate stamp and pressed it down hard on the fraudulent loan application file. The loud, satisfying thud echoed in the quiet office like a judge's heavy gavel sealing a definitive, unavoidable fate. Approved, she stated clearly, sliding the document into her outbox for immediate processing. We will wire the massive funds through a blind trust by the end of the business day. They will have their heavy rope to hang themselves. Just as I stood up to finally leave, the heavy frosted glass door of the office swung open abruptly. Harper's lead paralegal walked in rapidly, her face noticeably pale and her breathing slightly erratic. She was clutching a thick stack of formal court documents bearing the intimidating official seal of the state family court. I am so terribly sorry to interrupt, Ms. Quinn, the paralegal said quickly, handing the thick stack of papers directly to Harper. But the court courier just dropped this off, marked as a highly urgent priority filing. I scanned the digital docket. Aaron Crawford just filed an emergency petition for a full legal conservatorship. Harper snatched the documents, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon with lightning speed. She looked up at me, her expression hardening into pure cold fury. He is moving much faster than we originally anticipated, Garrett. Aaron has officially petitioned a federal judge to permanently strip you of all your civil and financial rights. He submitted a sworn false affidavit claiming you suffer from severe advanced senile dementia. He is aggressively demanding total legal control over your life, your healthcare decisions, and every single one of your bank accounts. They are trying to erase your existence completely. The heavy knocking on my front door started exactly at 8 o'clock the next morning. It was not a polite request for entry. It was an aggressive, demanding pounding that rattled the wooden frame. Before I could even stand up from my kitchen chair, the lock clicked. Aaron still had his emergency key. He pushed the door open, striding into my living room with the unearned confidence of a conqueror claiming his newly won territory. Right behind him was a man I had never seen before. He wore an expensive gray suit, carried a sleek leather briefcase, and possessed the oily, rehearsed smile of a man who made a lucrative living off the misery of others. Megan followed closely behind them, shutting the door firmly and leaning against it like a prison guard. "Good morning, Dad," Aaron announced, his voice carrying a forced, theatrical cheerfulness that made my stomach turn. "We brought a specialist to see you. This is Dr. Eris Thorne. He is a highly respected behavioral psychiatrist. We are just here to do a quick routine wellness check to make sure you are managing everything okay." Dr. Thorne did not even wait for an invitation. He walked directly to my dining table, unceremoniously pushed aside my morning newspaper, and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of medical evaluation forms and a gold pen. "Good morning, Garrett," Dr. Thorne said, speaking to me with the slow, exaggerated articulation one might use when addressing a severely impaired child. "Your son and daughter-in-law have expressed some deep concerns about your recent cognitive functions. I'm just going to ask you a few simple questions. I want you to relax and just do your best." The trap was officially set. They were trying to manufacture the exact medical evidence Aaron needed to push his emergency conservatorship through the federal courts. Dr. Thorne immediately launched into his rehearsed routine. He asked me to identify the current day of the week, the exact date, and the current president. I answered them correctly, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "But doctor, Thorne did not write down my correct answers. Instead, he smoothly pivoted to highly manipulative leading questions designed to intentionally disorient me. Garrett, do you frequently experience bouts of intense paranoia regarding your finances? Do you often misplace large sums of money, say $20,000, and then aggressively blame your loving family members for the loss? He was not conducting a legitimate psychiatric evaluation. He was actively feeding me Aaron and Megan's fabricated narrative, trying to corner me into a defensive outburst. As I stared into the doctor's cold, calculating eyes, my mind involuntarily drifted away from his terrible charade. I thought about my beautiful late wife, Camille. I remembered the agonizing, heartbreaking reality of watching her mind slowly succumb to the devastating ravages of actual dementia. I remembered the sheer terror in her deep brown eyes when she woke up one morning and could not remember the layout of our own kitchen. I remembered the countless sleepless nights I spent holding her shaking hands gently, reminding her of our shared history, trying to anchor her fading soul to the present world. Losing your cognitive function is a profoundly cruel, undignified, and terrifying tragedy. It is a nightmare that strips away your humanity piece by piece. And here was my own son coldly weaponizing the exact same devastating disease that slowly killed his own mother, using it as a cheap, fraudulent tool to steal my assets. The sheer moral depravity of Aaron's actions was breathtaking. He was mocking Camille's tragic memory by paying a corrupt doctor to falsely diagnose me with the very illness that took her life. While Dr. Thorne continued his barrage of insulting trapping questions, I noticed Megan subtly shifting her position by the front door. She had pulled her expensive smartphone out of her designer purse. She held it casually against her chest, but the camera lens was pointed directly at my face. A tiny, almost imperceptible green dot glowed on the screen. She was secretly recording the entire interaction. They needed undeniable visual proof for the judge. They needed a video of the angry, delusional, violent old black man losing his temper, screaming at a medical professional, and proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was a physical danger to himself and others. Sensing my unbreakable composure, Megan decided to actively escalate the situation. She stepped forward, her voice dripping with cruel, intentional venom. "Come on, Garrett, stop pretending you know what is going on," she sneered, pacing around the kitchen to get a better camera angle. "You are completely losing your mind, and you know it. Look at this disgusting house. You live like an absolute savage. You forgot to pay your bills, you misplaced your entire savings account, and yesterday you wandered into my husband's corporate office causing a massive, embarrassing scene. You are a glorified, washed-up handyman who cannot even remember his own name half the time." Her words were specifically engineered to trigger a violent reaction. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, practically shoving the hidden camera into my face. "You are pathetic, Garrett. You are nothing but a burden. You should be down on your knees thanking Aaron for taking control of your miserable life before you accidentally burn this filthy shack to the ground." Aaron stood silently in the corner, watching his wife ruthlessly humiliate his father, not lifting a single finger to stop her. My blood boiled with the intensity of a roaring furnace. Every muscle in my body coiled tight. My heavy, calloused hands curled into fists, resting on my thighs. I wanted to stand up, snatch that phone out of her arrogant hands, smash it against the hardwood floor, and physically throw all three of them out into the street. The righteous anger screaming in my head was nearly deafening. But my decades of surviving ruthless commercial real estate negotiations held me firmly in place. I recognized the bait. If I raised my voice, if I slammed my fist on the table, if I showed even a fraction of the immense rage burning inside my chest, they won. They would immediately take that footage straight to the judge, secure the conservatorship, and lock me away in a state facility before dinner. I had to swallow my pride to win the war. I took a slow, deep, trembling breath, forcing my fist to uncurl. I let my shoulders slump forward, intentionally adopting the defeated, exhausted posture of a broken man. I looked at Dr. Thorne, letting a perfectly calculated look of mild confusion wash over my features. "What day did you say it was again, doctor?" I mumbled, my voice intentionally shaking just a fraction. I rubbed my temples, acting as though a sudden, severe headache had disrupted my train of thought. I just cannot seem to remember where I put my bank book. Maybe Megan is right. Maybe I am just getting too tired. The immediate shift in the room was palpable. Aaron and Megan exchanged a swift, victorious glance, their eyes gleaming with unchecked greed. Dr. Thorne smiled a greasy, satisfied smile and began scribbling furiously on his official medical notepad, stamping his fraudulent evaluation with a heavy seal of approval. "Well, Garrett, Dr. Thorne said smoothly, packing away his documents. "I think we have seen enough here today. We will get you the help you desperately need." Megan lowered her phone, her smirk widening into a full triumphant grin. "Start packing your cheap clothes, old man," she whispered venomously as she opened the door. "Your ride to the facility comes next week." The three of them walked out, shutting the front door with a loud final click. The very second the lock engaged, my defeated posture instantly vanished. The confused, trembling old man evaporated into thin air, replaced by the ruthless founder of Crawford Holdings. I walked straight to my secure desk and pulled out my encrypted tablet. Harper Quinn was incredibly thorough. While I was stalling them in the kitchen, she had fully executed the background check I requested on Dr. Eris Thorne. The file she compiled was a goldmine of corruption. Thorne had a long undocumented history of accepting massive under-the-table kickbacks from predatory conservatorship firms. He had offshore bank accounts bursting with dirty money earned by falsely declaring wealthy seniors mentally incompetent. I attached the undeniable financial records, the illegal wire transfers, and the forged medical histories to a highly secure anonymous email. I addressed the message directly to the State Medical Board's disciplinary committee and copied the regional director of the FBI's healthcare fraud division. I hit send, watching the progress bar complete. Aaron thought he had just secured his golden ticket. He had absolutely no idea that his expensive, corrupt doctor was going to lose his medical license and face federal prison before the sun went down. 2 nights later, Aaron and Megan hosted a lavish fundraising gala for Apex Innovations at the Obsidian Room, one of the most exclusive and outrageously expensive 5-star restaurants in the entire city. They had rented out the magnificent main ballroom, filling it with wealthy venture capitalists, angel investors, and ruthless tech industry elites. They were desperately trying to secure another massive round of funding to mask the severe financial bleeding of their company. They needed to project an image of absolute limitless success, an illusion of unchecked corporate power. I made sure to disrupt that carefully curated image entirely. I arrived at the restaurant wearing my oldest, most worn-out church suit. The dark wool fabric was slightly faded at the shoulders from years of sun exposure. The lapels were completely outdated, and the cuffs of the crisp white dress shirt were visibly frayed. I looked exactly like the helpless, destitute old man they had painted me out to be in their fraudulent court filings. I walked slowly past the long line of imported luxury cars, completely ignored the condescending valet attendants, and stepped directly into the grand foyer. The massive crystal chandeliers cast a bright, illuminating light on my scuffed leather dress shoes as I made my way toward the private ballroom. I had barely taken 3 steps into the opulent reception area before Megan spotted me from across the room. She was holding a delicate flute of expensive champagne, laughing loudly with a group of older, wealthy investors playing the role of the perfect corporate wife. The exact moment her eyes locked onto my faded suit, the fake, radiant smile melted completely off her face, replaced instantly by a mask of pure, panicked fury. She aggressively shoved her glass into the hands of a passing waiter, nearly spilling the drink, and marched straight toward the maitre d's podium, forcefully grabbing the general manager by the arm. I stood quietly near the polished mahogany coat check as she pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest. "Get that vagrant out of here immediately," Megan hissed at the manager, her voice tight with barely contained rage. "This is a highly exclusive private corporate event. I will not have my company's top investors subjected to the sight of a confused, wandering homeless man. Call your security guards and physically throw him out onto the street before he ruins our entire presentation." The general manager, a distinguished older man named Victor, turned to look at me. He signaled for his security team to approach, his face set in a stern, professional scowl. But as he stepped closer and his experienced eyes adjusted to the lighting, he stopped dead in his tracks. The color completely drained from Victor's face. He immediately signaled his heavy-set guards to stand down. 10 years ago, this very restaurant was drowning in massive debt and facing imminent hostile foreclosure. I had quietly purchased the building through Crawford Holdings and drastically restructured their commercial lease, forgiving months of back rent simply because I respected Victor's relentless work ethic. I had single-handedly saved his life's work and kept his entire loyal staff employed when the predatory banks wanted to bulldoze the place. Megan impatiently tapped her expensive high heel against the polished marble floor. "Well, what are you waiting for?" she snapped at Victor, her voice growing shrill. "Remove him now." Victor completely ignored her. He straightened his perfectly tailored jacket, walked directly past my furious daughter-in-law, and approached me with a look of profound, unwavering respect. He bowed his head slightly, a rare gesture reserved strictly for his most elite, untouchable clientele. Mr. Crawford Victor said, his voice carrying a warm tone of absolute reverence that echoed slightly in the foyer. "It is a profound honor to finally have you dine with us again. We have not seen you in years. Please allow me to personally escort you to our absolute best table." Megan's jaw practically dropped to the floor. She stood completely frozen in absolute disbelief as Victor led me past the thick velvet ropes right into the vibrant center of the crowded ballroom. He bypassed the standard guest seating and guided me directly to the central VIP table of honor, the exact table Aaron had specifically reserved for his most crucial, high-net-worth investors. Victor snapped his fingers and 2 waiters rushed over to pull out my plush chair, lay a crisp linen napkin across my lap, and pour a glass of their finest vintage sparkling water. "Let me know if you require absolutely anything tonight, Mr. Crawford," Victor said loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "The entire restaurant is at your disposal." I thanked him quietly and took a sip of my water, perfectly comfortable in my worn-out suit amidst a sea of expensive tuxedos. Across the room, Megan looked like she was about to have a genuine medical emergency. Her face turned a violent shade of crimson. She could not comprehend how the old, disposable black man she had just tried to evict was currently receiving royal treatment from the most snobbish maitre d' in the city. Her carefully constructed narrative of me being a broke, senile burden was collapsing in real time. She aggressively pushed her way through the crowd of chatting investors, her eyes locked onto me with homicidal intent. Aaron noticed the commotion and began trailing nervously behind her, clearly terrified of a public scene. Megan reached my table, her chest heaving with uncontrolled anger. She slammed her hands down on the pristine white tablecloth, leaning in so close I could smell the sharp alcohol on her breath. "I do not know who you bribed or what pathetic sob story you told that manager," Megan whispered viciously, her voice shaking with unhinged rage. "But you are not going to embarrass us tonight. You are going to stand up, walk out the back door, and go back to your miserable little shack before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." When I did not move a single inch, Megan completely lost her fragile grip on reality. She reached her hand aggressively across the table, her perfectly manicured fingers curling into claws, fully intending to grab the lapel of my old suit and physically drag me out of the chair by brute force. She never made contact. Right at the exact fraction of a second, her hand reached across the crystal centerpieces. The massive projector screen mounted on the main stage behind me flickered violently. Aaron had set up a towering 20-foot digital display intended to showcase Apex Innovations' fabricated revenue graphs and glossy corporate logos to the wealthy crowd. Instead, the slick marketing presentation vanished entirely. The giant screen suddenly flashed a blinding, aggressive crimson red that bathed the entire ballroom in an eerie, alarming glow. The ambient chatter of the wealthy investors instantly died down, replaced by a rapid wave of confused murmurs. Megan froze her hand, hovering just inches from my chest as she turned her head to look at the stage. Displayed in massive, unforgiving white block letters across the red background was a devastating automated legal notification generated by Crawford Holdings' financial integration software. It read, "Apex Innovations in severe commercial default. All corporate bank accounts frozen. Immediate asset seizure in progress." A collective gasp rippled through the room of venture capitalists. The wealthy investors Aaron had spent months desperately courting began murmuring in severe alarm, pulling out their phones to frantically check their own financial terminals. Aaron stood completely paralyzed in the middle of the ballroom, all the blood draining entirely from his face, as he stared up at the towering red screen of his own absolute destruction. Megan's outstretched hand began to tremble uncontrollably. The trap I had laid in Harper Quinn's office had just snapped shut with bone-crushing force, and I had the best seat in the house to watch their entire empire burn. The deafening silence in the grand ballroom lasted exactly 3 seconds before absolute chaos violently erupted. The wealthy venture capitalists and prominent angel investors Aaron had spent months desperately courting did not bother asking any questions. They simply turned on their expensive heels and marched directly toward the grand exit. Their hushed, frantic whispers filled the opulent foyer as they aggressively ordered their valet cars, recognizing a rapidly sinking ship and fleeing before the icy water could touch them. Aaron finally snapped out of his severe catatonic state. The polished, confident facade of the brilliant tech visionary shattered completely into a million jagged pieces, leaving behind a frantic, deeply desperate man. He lunged forward with wild eyes, grabbing my forearm with a bruising, panicked grip, and practically dragged me out of my plush VIP chair. I allowed him to pull me forcefully through the rapidly dispersing crowd, my face remaining perfectly impassive as he yanked me violently down the hall and into the opulent men's restroom. He slammed the heavy mahogany door shut behind us and locked the deadbolt with a violently trembling hand. He spun around, reached into his tailored tuxedo jacket, and pulled out a crumpled, folded legal document and a silver pen. He shoved them aggressively against my chest. "You need to sign this right now," Aaron demanded, his voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered panic. "It is a rapid transfer of deed for your property. I have a private buyer willing to wire cash tonight to save us. If I do not inject $500,000 into the corporate accounts by midnight, the bank is going to liquidate absolutely everything. Sign the paper. Garrett." I looked at the crumpled paper pressing against my chest, then slowly lifted my gaze to meet my son's wildly dilated eyes. The man standing in front of me was absolutely no longer a chief executive officer. The sophisticated corporate vocabulary and the arrogant posturing were entirely gone. He was nothing but a desperate, cornered gambler begging for one last chip to throw on a losing table. Sweat beaded heavily on his forehead, ruining his expensive haircut, and his breathing was shallow and highly erratic. He reeked of expensive scotch and raw, unfiltered fear. He had gambled his entire livelihood on a massive, fraudulent loan, completely convinced his own sheer brilliance would save him from the severe consequences. Now that the house was actively calling in his massive debts, he was fully prepared to sacrifice his own father to cover his disastrous bets. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy, pacing the length of the marble restroom floor like a trapped animal. "I need that cash infusion to stop the asset seizure instantly," Aaron babbled, running a shaking hand over his face. "You do not understand the aggressive algorithms these holding companies use. Crawford Holdings is a notoriously ruthless corporate entity. They will strip my servers and auction off my proprietary software by tomorrow morning. I just need your house to buy me 48 hours to restructure the debt. You owe me this. You are my father. You are supposed to protect my future no matter what." He was completely blind to the agonizing irony of his words, begging for my protection, while aggressively trying to render me permanently homeless. When I made absolutely no move to take the silver pen from his trembling hand, the desperate pleading in Aaron's eyes instantly hardened into something incredibly vicious and dark. "Fine," Aaron spat, his voice dropping to a menacing, deadly whisper. "You want to play hardball. If you do not sign this deed right now, I am sending the psychiatric evaluation video straight to the federal judge tonight. Doctor, Thorne already signed the official affidavit certifying your severe aggressive dementia. I will have the state troopers forcibly remove you from that shack by tomorrow afternoon and lock you in a padded room. You will never see the outside of a state-funded facility again. Sign the damn paper or lose your freedom entirely." Before I could even register the sheer depravity of his explicit threat, the heavy mahogany restroom door was violently kicked open. Megan stormed into the men's room, her face a mask of pure, unhinged fury. She had clearly followed us, unwilling to let Aaron handle the extortion alone. She marched right up to me, her high heels clicking aggressively on the expensive tile. She snatched the deed from Aaron's hand and shoved it directly into my face. "You are going to sign this right now, you useless old man!" Megan shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the tiled walls. "We are losing everything out there because of a stupid banking error, and you are just standing here being completely stubborn. You do not deserve that property. You never did. You are nothing but an uneducated blue-collar carpenter. You spent your entire pathetic life covered in dirt and sawdust, hammering nails for pennies, while real people actually built the future." She pointed a sharp, accusing finger directly at my chest, her elitist racism and deep-seated classism finally erupting to the surface without any filter whatsoever. "You are just a foolish black man who got incredibly lucky buying a cheap plot of dirt 30 years ago. You do not know the first thing about real money or corporate leverage. Aaron and I are the absolute elite. We are the ones who actually matter in this city. You should consider it a massive privilege to surrender your worthless little house to save a company of our magnitude. Do not act like you have any real power here. You are completely illiterate when it comes to the real world. Sign the paper, hand over the asset, and get out of our way before we utterly destroy what is left of your miserable, pathetic life." Her chest was heaving heavily. her eyes wild with the intoxicating rush of finally saying every vile racist and classist thought she had secretly harbored against me for years. She stood there panting, fully expecting me to crumble under the weight of her vicious verbal assault. I looked at Megan's flushed, furious face and then at Aaron, who stood silently complicit in his wife's disgusting racist tirade. I did not yell. I did not defend my honor or my long history of hard work. I simply reached up, calmly brushed my jacket lapel where her finger had nearly touched me, and offered them a slow, chilling smile that froze the blood in their veins. "Keep your cheap pen," I said, my voice echoing with absolute cold finality. "You are going to need it to sign your bankruptcy papers." I turned my back on them and walked out of the restroom, leaving them standing in the echoing silence of their own impending ruin. I walked out the front doors of the restaurant and into the cool night air, leaving the chaotic gala far behind me. The very next morning, exactly at 8 o'clock, Aaron and Megan arrived at the towering glass headquarters of Apex Innovations. They rode the elevator up in desperate silence, clutching their briefcases, hoping to furiously dial their banking contacts from their desks to mitigate the disaster. But when they stepped off the elevator onto their exclusive executive floor, they stopped completely dead in their tracks. The massive double-glass doors leading into their sleek, modern office were wrapped tightly in heavy industrial steel chains. A massive brass padlock secured the handles together. Glued directly to the center of the glass was a bright neon orange legal notice from Crawford Holdings Commercial Property Management. It was a formal declaration of immediate commercial eviction and total asset forfeiture. Their entire corporate empire was locked away behind a single unbreakable chain. The neon orange sticker plastered dead center on the pristine glass of Apex Innovations was not just a piece of paper. It was a formal execution order. The heavy industrial steel chains wrapped tightly around the brushed aluminum handles physically barred Aaron and Megan from the corporate kingdom they had built on a shaky foundation of lies and unpaid debts. Aaron stared at the heavy brass padlock, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. He dropped his expensive leather briefcase, the loud, heavy thud echoing down the pristine corporate hallway. "This is an absolute joke," he stammered, stepping forward and aggressively grabbing the thick metal chains. "This has to be a massive administrative error. Crawford Holdings cannot legally do this to us. We have a multi-year commercial lease." He rattled the chains violently, his knuckles turning white as he desperately tried to pry the doors apart by sheer brute force. Megan stood frozen beside him, her perfectly contoured face draining of all color as she read the bold black print detailing the immediate asset forfeiture. Aaron pulled out his smartphone with trembling hands, his thumbs aggressively stabbing at the screen. "I am calling the authorities right now," he shouted, his voice cracking in sheer, unadulterated panic. "This is an illegal lockout. This is corporate sabotage. They cannot just freeze our entire operational infrastructure overnight without a court order." He paced furiously in front of the locked doors, screaming into his phone to the emergency police dispatcher, demanding that armed officers be sent immediately to arrest whoever dared to chain up his multi-million-dollar technology company. Within 10 minutes, 2 uniformed city police officers stepped off the elevator. Aaron rushed toward them instantly, his chest puffed out aggressively, pointing at the locked glass doors. "Officers, you need to bring bolt cutters immediately," Aaron demanded, fully expecting his wealthy chief executive persona to command instant blind obedience from the local authorities. "A rogue property management firm has illegally barricaded my private corporate headquarters. We have critical investor meetings today, and I need access to my proprietary servers." The older police officer did not reach for his radio or his tools. He calmly stepped around Aaron and approached the glass doors, shining a small tactical flashlight directly onto the neon orange legal notice. He read the fine print carefully, noting the official county seals and the strict judicial authorizations embedded in the eviction mandate. The officer turned back to Aaron, his expression entirely unsympathetic and rigidly professional. "Sir, I need you to step away from the doors immediately," the officer stated firmly, resting a hand casually on his utility belt. "This is a fully authorized commercial eviction executed by Crawford Holdings. They possess a signed and notarized default acceleration clause. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. If you attempt to breach these chains, I will be forced to arrest you right now for felony trespassing and destruction of private property." Megan gasped loudly, physically stumbling backward as if she had been struck in the chest. The unshakable arrogance she had wielded just 12 hours ago evaporated entirely. A small crowd of confused Apex employees had just arrived for their morning shift, standing nervously by the elevators, actively witnessing their untouchable elite bosses being treated like common street criminals. Aaron was completely hyperventilating now. He grabbed the edge of the eviction notice, his eyes darting frantically to the bottom of the page where the contact information for Crawford Holdings was listed in bold print. He dialed the number, aggressively pacing the hallway in tight, erratic circles, muttering vicious curses under his breath. He fully expected to scream at some low-level administrative assistant and heavily bully his way back into his office. Instead, the call connected directly to the pristine downtown office of Harper Quinn. Law Office of Harper Quinn, lead counsel for Crawford Holdings. Her crisp, highly professional voice answered through the phone speaker. Aaron did not even bother introducing himself. "You need to send someone down here to remove these chains immediately," he roared into the receiver, completely abandoning any shred of professional decorum. "You have illegally locked me out of my own company. We missed one single payment on a highly complex bridge loan. You cannot legally seize my entire corporate infrastructure over a minor banking technicality. I will sue your holding company into absolute oblivion." Harper let him finish his unhinged, desperate rant, her silence radiating absolute terrifying power over the line. "Mr. Crawford," Harper replied, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm and icy tone that commanded the entire hallway. "I strongly suggest you lower your voice. You did not miss a payment on a standard commercial loan. You willingly signed a predatory mezzanine debt contract with a strict zero-tolerance acceleration clause. By defaulting on the initial covenant yesterday, you legally surrendered all corporate assets, intellectual property, and physical hardware located within those premises directly to Crawford Holdings. We are not locking you out of your company. We are locking you out of our company. You currently own absolutely nothing." The call abruptly disconnected. The dial tone echoed loudly from the phone speaker, ringing in the hallway like a heavy death knell. Aaron stared at the blank screen, his entire body shaking violently. Megan snatched the expensive phone from his hands, her eyes wide with feral panic. "What did she mean? We own nothing!" Megan shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly down the corridor for all their employees to hear. "What exactly did you sign yesterday, Aaron? Tell me you did not leverage my personal shares in that desperate loan application." Aaron looked at his wife, his face a mask of pure, utter devastation. "I had to secure the cash," he stammered defensively, stepping away from her. "It was a bridge loan. I thought we had a 30-day grace period." Megan absolutely lost her mind. "You stupid, arrogant fool," she screamed, completely ignoring the crowd of whispering employees actively watching their public meltdown. "You signed away everything we built because you were too arrogant to read the fine print. You swore to me this funding round was secure. I am not going down with you. If my personal assets are seized because of your gross incompetence, I will destroy you in divorce court." The polished tech power couple was violently tearing each other apart right in front of the locked doors of their ruined empire. Pushed completely against the wall and permanently locked out of his own life, a dark, dangerous realization suddenly washed over Aaron's panicked face. The corporate money was gone, the vital servers were gone, the wealthy investor capital was entirely frozen. But he still had one final desperate card to play. He grabbed Megan aggressively by the arm, violently pulling her away from the gathering crowd of stunned tech employees. "Stop screaming and listen to me right now," Aaron hissed, his eyes burning with a manic feral intensity. "We still have the certified medical evaluation from Dr. Thorne. The emergency conservatorship petition is already sitting on the federal judge's desk. We do not need the company accounts to survive this week. The old man has a fully vested union pension and a massive lifetime retirement fund sitting completely untouched in his personal bank." Megan stopped struggling, her breathing heavy as the sinister criminal plan clicked seamlessly into place. If they could not magically save the company, they could at least aggressively drain their father's life savings to pay off their immediate personal debts and flee the corporate fallout. "We have the signed psychiatric affidavit proving he is legally incompetent," Aaron continued rapidly, his voice trembling with dark, unhinged desperation. "I have his account numbers and my original birth certificate. We walk into that bank right now, present the severe medical emergency documents, and demand an immediate liquidation of his retirement funds for his mandatory assisted living care." Megan nodded quickly, her selfish survival instinct completely overriding her anger toward her husband. They sprinted toward the elevator banks, completely abandoning their locked office and their bewildered, loyal employees. They rushed out to the parking garage, jumped into their leased luxury vehicle, and sped recklessly into the morning traffic, heading straight for my personal bank to steal my last remaining dime. Aaron aggressively shoved open the heavy glass doors of my personal bank, marching straight past the line of waiting customers. Megan followed closely behind him, her sharp heels clicking rapidly against the polished tile floor. They completely bypassed the tellers and barged directly into the branch manager's private office. Mr. Sterling, the bank manager who had handled my accounts for over 20 years, looked up in absolute shock as Aaron slammed a thick manila folder and his expensive smartphone directly onto the center of the pristine mahogany desk. Aaron did not even bother to sit down or offer a polite greeting. He leaned heavily over the desk, his face flushed and covered in a cold, nervous sweat. "We have a massive family medical emergency," Aaron barked, his voice loud enough to carry through the closed office door. "I need to immediately liquidate my father's entire union pension and transfer the full balance of his lifetime retirement fund into my personal corporate account." Aaron aggressively tapped the screen of his phone, playing the heavily edited video Megan had secretly recorded the day before. The footage showed me acting confused and exhausted in my kitchen. He then pushed the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation boldly signed by Dr. Eris Thorne right under the manager's nose. The medical documentation is completely certified, and the emergency conservatorship petition is already filed with the federal court. My father has completely lost his mind. He is suffering from severe advanced dementia, and we need these liquid assets right now to secure his mandatory full-time assisted living care. While Aaron was busy screaming his fabricated sob story inside the bank, I was sitting comfortably on a cold stone bench just across the busy street. I had anticipated their desperate exact move the very second I authorized the commercial lockout. I held a steaming cup of black coffee in my right hand, letting the morning sun warm my face as I watched the chaotic scene unfold perfectly through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the bank branch. From my comfortable vantage point, it looked exactly like a silent movie playing out a deeply tragic comedy. I could clearly see Aaron wildly waving his arms, pacing back and forth in the small office, his desperation completely consuming his usual polished corporate persona. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, bitter roast. For 36 years, I had fiercely protected that boy from every single hardship the world had to offer. I had quietly absorbed his mistakes, funded his expensive education, and shielded him from the harsh realities of consequence. Seeing him now aggressively trying to steal the very retirement funds I had bled to save simply to cover his own massive, arrogant failures solidified my total lack of remorse. They thought they were ruthlessly backing an old, helpless man into a dark corner. They had absolutely no idea that I had already locked every single exit door and thrown away the key. Inside the office, Mr. Sterling calmly adjusted his glasses and looked down at the forged medical documents. He was a meticulous man who strictly followed banking protocols, and more importantly, he had spoken to me personally just yesterday afternoon to secure my funds. I saw him shake his head firmly, pushing the paperwork back across the desk toward Aaron. "Mr. Sterling's voice did not carry through the thick glass, but his rigid posture and stern expression communicated a total, undeniable rejection. Aaron slammed his fist violently against the desk, clearly enraged that his expensive, fraudulent medical paperwork was not instantly unlocking my vault. He pointed a trembling finger at the manager, undoubtedly threatening him with massive legal action. Right at that exact second of peak desperation, Aaron's smartphone began to ring loudly. The caller ID flashed brightly enough for Megan to notice. It was Dr. Eris Thorne. Aaron snatched the phone off the desk, answering it with a frantic, aggressive tone, likely expecting the corrupt psychiatrist to confirm the fake diagnosis directly to the bank manager. Instead, Aaron's face instantly drained of every single drop of color. He physically staggered backward, hitting the office wall as if the voice on the other end of the line had just delivered a fatal gunshot wound. "Doctor." Thorne was completely hyperventilating, his voice shrieking through the phone speaker in pure, unadulterated terror. The corrupt doctor had just received the most devastating wake-up call of his entire miserable life. "Aaron, you completely ruined me!" Thorne screamed, his panic echoing horribly over the line. "The state medical board just raided my private clinic an hour ago. They aggressively seized all my patient computers and completely stripped my medical license on the spot. My offshore financial records were anonymously leaked to the federal authorities. The FBI Healthcare Fraud Division is currently auditing every single conservatorship case I have touched in the past decade." Aaron tried to speak, tried to aggressively calm the panicked doctor down, but Thorne was completely hysterical. I am completely retracting my medical evaluation of your father immediately, Thorne yelled, his voice cracking with absolute fear. The document I gave you is entirely null and void. Do not submit that psychiatric affidavit to the federal judge. If you use my signature to steal his money, they will federally indict both of us for conspiracy and wire fraud. I am deleting your number. Do not ever contact me again. The call abruptly disconnected. Aaron stood frozen against the wall, staring at the dead phone in his trembling hand. The very last fraudulent weapon he had in his arsenal had just violently exploded right in his face. His golden ticket to my retirement savings was officially worthless. Megan watched the absolute horror wash over her husband's pale face and instantly realized their criminal master plan had completely collapsed. The corrupt doctor was heavily compromised. The bank manager was actively calling security to escort them out, and the massive corporate debt from Apex Innovations was still crushing them alive. Her ruthless survival instinct violently kicked in, entirely overriding any remaining shred of marital loyalty. She aggressively snatched her expensive designer purse from the chair and pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Aaron's chest. "You absolute failure," Megan hissed, her voice dripping with pure, unfiltered venom. "I am not going to federal prison because you are too stupid to execute a basic medical scam. I am not losing my personal luxury assets to cover your catastrophic business loans. You have exactly 24 hours to fix this massive corporate debt. If you do not get those office doors unchained by tomorrow morning, I am filing for an immediate aggressive divorce and leaving you with every single penny of this toxic liability." Megan turned on her heel and stormed out of the bank, leaving Aaron completely isolated and drowning in his own catastrophic mess. Pushed entirely to the brink of total annihilation, Aaron realized he only had one terrifying option left. The fraudulent medical scheme was dead. His company was locked down. His wife was abandoning ship. The only way to survive was to confront the ruthless corporate entity that had orchestrated his sudden downfall. He sprinted out of the bank, his eyes wild with sheer manic desperation, determined to drive straight to the towering headquarters of Crawford Holdings. He was going to blindly march into the executive boardroom and aggressively demand a face-to-face meeting with the faceless CEO who had effortlessly destroyed his life. He had absolutely no idea he was walking directly into my final trap. Through the bank's exterior security cameras, I watched Aaron intercept Megan before she could even start her car engine in the parking lot. He slammed his hands against her driver's side window, frantically pleading with her not to abandon him. He aggressively reminded her that as the chief financial officer of Apex Innovations, her name was irrevocably tied to the entire corporate structure. A messy divorce right now would absolutely not shield her from federal bankruptcy courts or a massive corporate debt liquidation. They were permanently tethered to his sinking ship. Realizing the horrifying legal truth of his words, Megan reluctantly stepped out of the vehicle and agreed to a temporary truce. They desperately needed to speak directly to the faceless CEO of Crawford Holdings. But getting an audience with an invisible billionaire required extreme measures. I had my financial team track their accounts in real time. I watched as they pooled the absolute last of their personal liquid cash, entirely emptying their joint checking account to blindly bribe a high-level corporate fixer they had previously used for aggressive networking. The fixer, who was secretly on my payroll, promised to bypass the standard gatekeepers and secure an emergency sit-down at my headquarters. Within 2 agonizing hours, they were standing inside the towering glass structure they had only ever read about in elite financial magazines. They nervously rode the private executive elevator to the penthouse floor, their previous arrogance entirely replaced by the sickening reality of their impending ruin. They stepped out into a dimly lit, ultra-modern reception area, utterly terrified and completely at the mercy of the conglomerate that had mercilessly chained their office doors shut. A silent, stoic security guard escorted them into my primary executive boardroom. The sheer, breathtaking opulence of the space was specifically designed by me to intimidate anyone who walked through those doors. The room featured floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, dominating view of the city skyline. A massive slab of polished black walnut served as the central conference table, surrounded by 12 imposing leather chairs. But it was the precise decor lining the rich mahogany walls that held the true secret of the entire empire. Carefully displayed in custom illuminated glass cases were several heavily worn antique carpentry tools. A rusted framing hammer, a scuffed wooden folding rule, and a heavily used spirit level had all been meticulously plated in solid bronze. They were proudly showcased like priceless historical artifacts. To any observant outsider, these specific items clearly indicated the humble blue-collar origins of the company founder. But Aaron was far too consumed by his own suffocating panic to notice the glaring obvious connection. He paced erratically at the far end of the room, completely ignoring the bronze-plated hammer that was an exact replica of the one I had patiently taught him to use when he was a boy. He was entirely blind to his own history. Megan sat rigidly in the corner chair, aggressively biting her perfectly manicured nails, her eyes darting nervously toward the heavy double doors. They were two highly desperate animals trapped in a gilded cage, entirely unaware that the hunter watching them through the hidden security cameras was the very man they had tried to discard. Watching the live high-definition feed from my private adjoining office, I signaled Harper Quinn to make her entrance. The heavy double doors finally swung open, breaking the suffocating tension in the room. Harper strode in with the chilling confidence of a seasoned executioner. She wore an immaculate tailored charcoal suit, her sharp eyes scanning the two desperate executives with blatant professional disdain. She did not offer a polite greeting. She did not ask them to sit down. She walked directly to the head of the black walnut table and dropped a single crisp document onto the polished wood, placing a heavy silver fountain pen right next to it. Aaron and Megan scrambled toward the table like starving beggars lunging for a scrap of bread. Aaron opened his mouth to launch into a frantic rehearsed pitch about corporate restructuring and extended grace periods, but Harper instantly silenced him by raising a single commanding hand. "You are not here to negotiate a payment plan," Mr. Crawford, Harper stated, her voice as hard and unforgiving as solid ice. "You bypassed standard legal channels and aggressively bribed a corporate associate to secure this audience. The CEO is fully aware of your desperate financial situation, and he is willing to sit at this table and listen to your proposal to save Apex Innovations." Aaron let out a massive, jagged sigh of relief, his shoulders slumping as he mistakenly believed he had just found a miraculous lifeline. Megan even managed a weak, trembling smile, but Harper was absolutely not finished. However, Harper continued leaning forward and tapping a sharp fingernail directly onto the document she had provided. "The CEO requires a preliminary demonstration of absolute good faith before he walks through those doors. He will grant you a 10-minute meeting on one strict, non-negotiable condition. You must sign this exact document right now." Aaron eagerly reached for the paper, fully expecting a standard non-disclosure agreement or a harsh preliminary term sheet. As his eyes rapidly scanned the dense legal paragraphs, the last remaining drops of blood drained completely from his face. His hands began to shake so violently the paper rattled loudly in the quiet boardroom. "What exactly is this?" Aaron choked out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wheeze. "This is a formal sworn confession." Harper did not blink. "That is a legally binding affidavit," she confirmed coldly. "It explicitly states that you, Aaron Crawford, knowingly and maliciously forged the signature of your father, Garrett Crawford, on the primary commercial loan guarantee last week. It outlines your direct admission to committing severe financial fraud and felony identity theft. You will sign it, date it, and permanently waive your right to contest its absolute validity. If you sign this confession, the CEO will walk in and discuss unfreezing your corporate assets. If you refuse, I will press a button under this desk and building security will physically throw you both out onto the street. The choice is entirely yours." Aaron violently threw the document back onto the table as if it were actively burning his fingers. "You are completely out of your mind," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips as his desperation morphed into intense defensive rage. "I am not signing a sworn federal confession to a felony. You could immediately hand that over to the district attorney and have me locked in a penitentiary for a decade. This is blatant extortion." Harper did not raise her voice or flinch at his aggressive outburst. She simply reached into her tailored jacket pocket, pulled out a sleek digital voice recorder, and pressed the play button. The crystal-clear audio of Aaron screaming at the shady underground broker who arranged the loan filled the boardroom. "Yes, I traced the old man's signature perfectly." Aaron's recorded voice echoed aggressively across the room. "He is losing his mind anyway. He will never know the difference. Just process the damn paperwork and wire the cash." Harper clicked the recorder off and slid it back into her pocket, staring Aaron down with absolute lethal precision. "We do not need your confession to prove you committed the fraud," Mr. Crawford, Harper stated smoothly. "We already possess undeniable criminal evidence of your actions. The CEO simply requires you to humble yourself and put your guilt in writing to secure the meeting. Your company is currently losing hundreds of thousands of dollars for every single hour your servers remain chained shut. Your wealthy investors are rapidly pulling their capital. You are completely out of time, out of money, and out of leverage. Pick up the pen. Aaron stared at the silver pen resting on the dark wood. He was entirely backed into a pitch-black corner with absolutely nowhere left to run. His breath hitched painfully in his throat as he slowly, agonizingly reached out his trembling fingers and picked up the heavy silver pen. Just as the cold metal of the pen met Aaron's shaking fingertips, the sound of a chair violently scraping against the hardwood floor shattered the suffocating tension. Megan scrambled backward, physically distancing herself from her husband as if he had suddenly contracted a highly contagious and deadly disease. Her eyes, previously wide with shared panic, narrowed into razor-sharp slits of pure, calculated self-preservation. She pointed a perfectly manicured, accusing finger directly at Aaron's chest, her voice echoing shrilly in the expansive boardroom. "I had absolutely nothing to do with this massive felony," Megan declared, her tone completely devoid of any remaining marital loyalty or affection. "I am the chief financial officer of Apex Innovations, but I was kept completely entirely in the dark regarding the specific illegal origins of that bridge loan. He swore to me he secured the funding through a legitimate shadow lender. I never saw the original guarantee documents, and I certainly never authorized the blatant, sloppy forgery of his father's signature." She turned her panicked, desperate gaze toward Harper Quinn, aggressively throwing her husband directly under the proverbial bus to save her own skin. "Put it on the official corporate record right now," Megan insisted, her chest heaving with frantic, shallow breaths. "Aaron acted completely alone in this criminal endeavor. He committed this massive financial fraud without my knowledge or consent. I will gladly testify against him in federal court to prove my absolute innocence. He is a reckless, arrogant criminal, and I refuse to let him drag me down into a federal prison cell just because he panicked." Aaron froze, the heavy silver pen slipping slightly in his slick, sweaty grip. He slowly turned his head to look at the woman he had married, the woman who had stood beside him at the altar and sworn eternal devotion in front of hundreds of wealthy guests. He stared at her pale, terrified face, absolutely blindsided by the sheer speed and viciousness of her betrayal. For years, Aaron had deeply convinced himself that he was remarkably different, that he was the exceptional, sophisticated black tech visionary who had seamlessly assimilated into her elite, incredibly privileged white world. He had actively participated in her cruel mockery of his own father, completely believing that sharing her massive arrogance made them equal, untouchable partners in their corporate kingdom. But looking into her cold, calculating eyes in that precise moment, a devastating realization slammed into him with the sheer destructive force of a runaway freight train. The profound, unfiltered contempt radiating from Megan's face was not new. It was the exact same sickening disgust she had directed at Garrett in his modest kitchen just days ago. To Megan, Aaron was never a true equal. He was simply a highly profitable accessory, a convenient, lucrative stepping stone to corporate wealth and social status. Now that his massive financial utility had evaporated and legal peril loomed, she was discarding him with the exact same ruthless, heartless ease she used to evict his father. The profound racial and classist undertones of her instant betrayal stripped away every single last illusion Aaron had about his marriage. He was entirely, desperately alone. "You treacherous, miserable coward," Aaron roared, dropping the silver pen onto the black walnut table. The sheer volume of his voice rattled the crystal water glasses sitting perfectly arranged between them. "How dare you stand there and play the innocent, ignorant victim? You were the one relentlessly pushing for aggressive market expansion when we had zero capital. You were the one screaming in my ear every single night about leveraging our remaining assets to secure more venture capital at any cost. You spent hundreds of thousands of dollars from the company accounts on designer clothes and luxury vacations while actively knowing our margins were bleeding dry. You are just as deeply complicit in this massive fraud as I am." Megan did not back down a single inch. She stepped aggressively forward, her face twisted in an ugly, vicious snarl. "Do not try to pin your pathetic, idiotic mistakes on me, Aaron," she shrieked, entirely abandoning her polished corporate facade. "I demanded financial results from a competent CEO. I did not tell you to commit a blatant federal felony by forging your useless father's signature on government documents. You were too weak and incompetent to secure legitimate funding in the open market. You ruined everything we built because you are a pathetic fraud playing dress-up in the tech industry. I am filing for an immediate aggressive divorce the absolute second I walk out of this building, and I am leaving you to rot in a federal penitentiary. The boardroom descended into a ferocious, deafening screaming match. The polished power couple was violently tearing each other to shreds, airing every dirty secret, every financial grievance, and every ounce of toxic marital resentment right in front of Harper Quinn. Aaron hurled explosive accusations of gross financial negligence while Megan screamed threats of total legal annihilation and public ruin. They were two cornered rats viciously biting each other in a desperate, pathetic bid to survive a rapidly sinking ship. Harper simply stood at the head of the table, her hands neatly folded in front of her, watching their spectacular public meltdown with absolute chilling professional detachment. She did not intervene. She let them completely exhaust their frantic, adrenaline-fueled rage until they were both panting heavily, the air in the boardroom thick with toxic animosity. "Are you two quite finished?" Harper asked, her voice cutting through the heavy silence like a sharpened razor blade. "Because the clock is aggressively ticking, and the CEO's patience is incredibly thin. Your corporate servers are currently being prepared for a massive public auction. Every single second you waste screaming at each other is another nail in the coffin of your precious company. Sign the confession right now, Mr. Crawford, or I will call security and have you both physically thrown out onto the street with absolutely nothing." Aaron looked at the furious, hateful face of his wife, and then down at the damning legal document resting on the polished wood. He had no allies left. He had no hidden wealth to tap into. His back was pressed so hard against the wall it was actively breaking his spine. With a heavy, ragged sigh that sounded like a physical surrender, Aaron picked up the heavy silver pen once more. His hand shook violently as he pressed the expensive nib against the crisp, white paper. He gritted his teeth, a tear of pure, humiliating defeat escaping the corner of his eye, and rapidly signed his name. He dated the sworn affidavit, legally cementing his absolute admission to massive commercial fraud and felony identity theft. He slid the paper back across the table toward Harper, his shoulders entirely slumped in total, devastating defeat. "I signed it." Aaron choked out, his voice hoarse and completely broken. "Now let me see the CEO so I can beg for my company back." "Harper." Quinn reached out and smoothly pulled the signed confession across the polished mahogany. She picked it up delicately, her sharp eyes meticulously scanning the trembling, erratic signature to ensure it was legally binding and entirely complete. A slow, chilling smile spread across her face, radiating a sense of absolute, terrifying victory. The trap was permanently, undeniably locked. Aaron had just willingly handed over the ultimate legal weapon, cementing his total destruction with his own hand. Harper meticulously slid the document into a sleek leather portfolio and snapped it shut with a loud, definitive click. She looked down at Aaron and Megan, her expression transitioning from professional disdain to pure, unadulterated satisfaction. "You have fulfilled the preliminary requirement perfectly," Harper stated smoothly, her voice echoing with a dark, triumphant finality. "The CEO has been closely monitoring this entire miserable exchange. He is fully prepared to address your desperate, pathetic pleas for corporate mercy." Harper reached her hand under the heavy lip of the conference table and pressed a hidden silent button. At the far end of the expansive boardroom, bathed in the dramatic natural light pouring in from the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, sat a massive high-backed executive leather chair facing the spectacular city skyline. The heavy chair had been completely stationary the entire time, its occupant entirely hidden from view. A low, mechanical hum vibrated softly through the floorboards. The giant leather chair slowly, deliberately began to rotate around to face the center of the room. Aaron and Megan held their breath, their eyes wide with terrified anticipation, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They fully expected to see a ruthless, nameless billionaire ready to dictate the terms of their financial execution. The chair completed its rotation, and the true architect of their downfall finally looked them dead in the eye. The heavy leather chair finished its slow, dramatic rotation, coming to a complete stop facing the direct center of the room. I sat there in absolute, pristine silence, my hands resting calmly on the polished armrests. I was no longer the hunched, exhausted carpenter in a faded plaid shirt they had tried to casually throw onto the street like yesterday's garbage. I wore a masterfully tailored, charcoal bespoke suit that fit my broad shoulders with exacting precision. A crisp white silk shirt and a subtle silver tie clip completed the total physical transformation. The posture of a defeated, confused old man had evaporated entirely, replaced by the imposing, unshakable aura of a multimillionaire titan who controlled the very ground beneath their feet. Aaron and Megan simply stopped breathing. Their eyes bulged violently from their sockets, completely unable to process the impossible image presented to them. Aaron physically staggered backward, his expensive leather shoes catching clumsily on the thick carpet, as if all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of his lungs. He blinked rapidly, desperately waiting for the horrific mirage to fade, praying to see a ruthless white-collar billionaire instead of the father he had so callously discarded. But the mirage did not fade. I simply tilted my head, letting the silence stretch into an eternity, allowing the sheer magnitude of their colossal mistake to crush their chests. "Hello, Aaron. Hello, Megan," I finally said, my voice rich, deep, and echoing with absolute chilling authority. "Welcome to my office." The devastating puzzle pieces began to slam into place with violent, undeniable clarity inside Aaron's panicked mind. He slowly turned his head away from me, his terrified gaze locking onto the illuminated glass display cases lining the mahogany walls. The rusted framing hammer, the scuffed wooden folding rule, the heavy spirit level plated in solid bronze. They were not abstract pieces of corporate modern art. They were my actual tools, the very same tools I had used to put warm food in his mouth and build the roof over his head when he was a child. The very tools I had used to literally construct the foundation of the skyscraper they were currently standing in. Then his eyes drifted to the heavy silver pen and the legal pad resting near Harper. Crawford Holdings. It was not a random corporate moniker. It was our family name. It was my name. The sheer, unfathomable scale of my hidden wealth washed over them like a tidal wave of battery acid. The powerful attorney Harper Quinn was not an independent contractor hired to ruin them. She was my fiercely loyal employee executing my direct commands to the exact letter. I had owned their office building the entire time. Every single rent check they had ever paid went directly into my personal accounts. Aaron had just legally signed over his entire tech company, his proprietary software, and his entire future to the very man he had tried to lock inside a state-funded psychiatric ward. The absolute soul-crushing terror on their faces was a masterpiece I had patiently waited weeks to witness. The suffocating reality was simply too immense for Megan's fragile, elitist ego to handle. Her brain violently rejected the undeniable truth standing right in front of her. She took a shaky step forward, her face contorting into a mask of ugly, desperate denial. "This is a sick, elaborate joke," Megan shrieked, her voice cracking as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are absolutely not the CEO of this conglomerate. You are a broke, uneducated handyman who cannot even balance a basic checking account." "Aaron, do not listen to a single word of this. He is just a prop. He hired these people to run a massive scam to scare us into dropping the conservatorship. He probably paid this fake lawyer to print out fraudulent eviction notices to extort us for his retirement money." She was hyperventilating now, spinning wild, frantic conspiracy theories rather than accepting that a black man she considered entirely beneath her was actually a real estate tycoon. "You are a pathetic, miserable old man," Megan continued to scream, stepping aggressively closer to the massive walnut table. "You do not have the intelligence, the capital, or the pedigree to run a commercial real estate empire. I want to see the real CEO right now. I demand to speak to the actual owner of this holding company before I call the federal authorities and have you all arrested for corporate impersonation." I did not even blink at her pathetic tantrum. I simply shifted my gaze to Harper Quinn. Harper smiled her signature cold, predatory smile and calmly picked up a thick, leather-bound portfolio from the table. She opened it smoothly and extracted a stack of yellowed original legal documents heavily stamped with state seals. She did not hand them to Megan. She aggressively threw them across the polished wood, letting them slide directly to the edge of the table where Aaron stood, frozen in shock. "Read them carefully, Mr. Crawford," Harper commanded, her voice dripping with sheer professional mockery. "Those are the original certified articles of incorporation for Crawford Holdings filed precisely 20 years ago. You will clearly see the official state registry, the commercial banking charters, and the initial property deeds. And right at the bottom of every single page, you will see the authenticated, legally binding signature of the sole founder and primary shareholder, Garrett Crawford." Aaron slowly reached down with trembling hands. He picked up the heavy parchment paper. His eyes darted across the official government seals and the long list of commercial assets. He saw the purchase agreement for the very building we were standing in, dated back when he was still in high school. He saw my unmistakable signature, bold and firm, authorizing the multi-million-dollar acquisitions. The documents were undeniably real. Megan leaned over his shoulder, her eyes frantically scanning the pages searching for any sign of forgery, but there was none. The staggering, impossible wealth was entirely legitimate. The man she had continuously insulted, belittled, and attempted to violently throw onto the streets was a billionaire. And he now owned every single asset her husband had ever created. Megan's mouth opened and closed silently, her arrogant superiority completely shattered into dust. The final remnants of Aaron's towering ego collapsed, entirely imploding under the crushing weight of his own monumental stupidity. The glossy corporate armor, the expensive suit, the arrogant tech CEO persona melted away completely, leaving absolutely nothing but a terrified, broken man who had just willingly signed his own financial death warrant. He dropped the legal documents onto the floor. His knees physically gave out. Aaron fell hard against the plush carpet, dropping directly to his knees at the foot of the massive walnut conference table. He crawled forward, closing the distance between us, his hands reaching out desperately toward my polished shoes. "Dad, please." Aaron sobbed, heavy tears spilling over his cheeks and dropping onto the expensive rug. "I am so sorry. I was blind. I was desperate. The investors were threatening to pull their funding, and I completely panicked. I never actually wanted to put you in a facility. It was just a stupid, reckless mistake. You have to believe me. Please, Dad, you are my father. You have to forgive me. You cannot take my company away. I will do whatever you want. I will restructure the equity. I will give you a board seat. Just tear up that confession and give me my life back. Please do not do this to your own son." He was openly weeping now, a pathetic, groveling mess, begging for mercy from the exact man he had treated worse than garbage. I looked down at the pathetic, weeping man clutching my polished shoes. There was absolutely no trace of paternal warmth left in my heart. The immense love I had harbored for him died the exact moment he allowed a corrupt doctor into my home to steal my sanity. I did not bend down to comfort him. I did not offer a single word of solace. Instead, I calmly reached into the inner breast pocket of my bespoke suit jacket. I pulled out a folded piece of heavy paper. It was the exact same 30-day eviction notice Megan had violently slammed onto my kitchen table just a few days ago. I let it unfold and dropped it directly onto Aaron's tear-stained face. The paper fluttered down, landing harshly against his cheek before resting on the expensive carpet between his knees. "You brought that to my sanctuary," I stated, my voice as cold and unforgiving as a steel vault. "You stood in the very house I built with my bare hands, the house I legally put in your name to protect you, and you tried to throw me out onto the street like a stray dog. You did not care where I went. You did not care if I froze or starved. You only cared about liquidating my home to cover your massive corporate failures. Look at that paper, Aaron. Look at it closely. That is the exact worth of your loyalty." Megan stood frozen in the corner, her arrogant posture completely destroyed. I shifted my cold gaze from my kneeling son to her pale, terrified face. "Do you remember your exact words to me, Megan?" I asked, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the boardroom. "You proudly declared that I was a massive burden. You looked me dead in the eye and guaranteed that I could not survive a single week without your generous charity. You called me a useless old man who lacked the brains and the stamina to exist in the real world." A dark, humorless laugh escaped my chest. "Well, let us see exactly who the helpless dependent really is. Let us see who cannot survive a single week without a massive handout. For 36 years, I shielded this boy from every consequence. I handed him lunch money, paid his expensive college tuition, and funded his extravagant lifestyle because I wanted him to have the opportunities I was denied. I thought I was building a strong, independent man. Instead, my blind generosity created a spoiled, arrogant monster who was willing to commit federal fraud and elder abuse the moment his bank account ran dry. You thought you controlled the board because you held a single cheap pawn. You completely failed to realize I owned the entire game." Aaron desperately grabbed the eviction notice from the floor, crushing it in his trembling fists. "Dad, please, you cannot take Apex away from me," he begged, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "It is my entire life. I built that software from scratch. You can take the building, you can take the cars, but please leave me the intellectual property. I will pay you back every single cent with heavy interest." I shook my head slowly, feeling a profound sense of closure. "You still do not understand the sheer magnitude of your financial execution, Aaron. You do not have an intellectual property anymore. You do not have a company. You do not have a client list. I turned to Harper Quinn, giving her a sharp nod. Harper stepped forward, opening her leather portfolio and extracting a thick stack of finalized corporate seizure documents. As of 8 o'clock this morning, Harper announced, her voice echoing with lethal professional precision, Crawford Holdings officially executed the acceleration clause embedded in your fraudulent loan agreement. We have legally seized all physical and digital assets belonging to Apex Innovations. Our specialized tech teams have already migrated your proprietary software algorithms to our secure servers. Your wealthy venture capital investors have been formally notified of your catastrophic default, and they have universally backed our hostile takeover to mitigate their own massive losses. You are completely locked out of the corporate network. You no longer hold a seat on the board. You are permanently stripped of your chief executive title. Aaron let out a guttural, agonizing wail, collapsing entirely onto his stomach on the boardroom rug. He pounded his fists against the floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of his total, absolute ruin crushed his spirit. I looked down at him without a single ounce of pity. You wanted to play the role of the ruthless corporate shark, Aaron. You wanted to swim with the apex predators, but you were just a foolish, greedy minnow bleeding heavily in the water. I am the shark, and I just swallowed your entire pathetic empire in a single bite. Every line of code you wrote, every elite client you schmoozed, and every dollar of future revenue your company generates now belongs exclusively to Crawford Holdings. The empire you aggressively flaunted to humiliate me is now a minor subsidiary in my vast financial portfolio. I will use the profits from your stolen company to fund scholarships for young, brilliant black kids who actually understand the profound value of hard work and familial loyalty. You are leaving this building today with absolutely nothing but the expensive clothes on your back. Megan suddenly snapped out of her paralyzed state. The terrifying realization that she was now married to a penniless, disgraced man ignited a feral, desperate rage inside her. You cannot legally do this, Megan shrieked, her face twisting into a hideous mask of pure hatred. This is blatant corporate extortion. You deliberately trapped us. I am going to hire the most vicious litigators in this city. I will drag you through the federal courts for years. I will expose your entire shady operation and sue you for massive fraudulent entrapment. We will destroy your miserable life. I did not flinch at her empty, shrieking threats. I simply raised my hand and signaled to Harper. Megan, I stated calmly over her frantic screaming, you seem to have completely forgotten the preliminary paperwork your husband so eagerly signed just 15 minutes ago. Harper walked briskly toward the heavy double doors of the boardroom. She grabbed the polished brass handles and pulled them wide open. Standing squarely in the hallway were two armed city police detectives alongside a senior investigator from the Federal Fraud Division. Harper handed the lead detective the crisp white sworn affidavit bearing Aaron's unmistakable signature. The detective scanned the document, his stern face hardening as he looked past Harper and locked eyes with my sobbing son on the floor. Aaron Crawford, the detective announced loudly, his heavy boots stepping decisively onto the plush boardroom carpet. You are under arrest for felony identity theft, aggressive commercial fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Megan physically recoiled, pressing her back hard against the mahogany wall as the officers pulled out their heavy steel handcuffs. The ultimate trap had fully closed. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around Aaron's wrists echoed loudly in the opulent boardroom. The lead detective smoothly read Aaron his Miranda rights, his voice a dull, monotone drone that signaled the absolute end of my son's privileged life. Aaron did not look at me. He twisted his neck frantically to look at Megan, his eyes begging for reassurance, pleading for his wife to call a high-powered defense attorney. But Megan was already backing away toward the heavy double doors. She did not spare her husband a single glance of sympathy or support. The second the detectives marched Aaron out of the room, she bolted. I watched through the panoramic windows as she sprinted across the concrete plaza toward her leased luxury SUV. Megan threw herself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and immediately pulled out her smartphone. Her ruthless survival instinct demanded she liquidate every personal asset before the federal authorities could seize them. She frantically logged into her private wealth management portal, intending to wire her stock options and personal savings into an untouchable offshore account. A glaring red error message flashed across her screen stating her account was frozen due to joint liability lien. Panic gripping her throat, she quickly pulled out her platinum credit cards, dialing her concierge service to book a luxury hotel suite and a first-class flight out of the state. The automated voice informed her every transaction was declined. Every single card she owned was dead plastic. As the chief financial officer of Apex Innovations and the legal spouse of a man currently being booked for massive commercial fraud, she was financially paralyzed. Crawford Holdings and the federal investigators had swiftly cast a massive net, freezing every bank account, investment portfolio, and credit line associated with their names. Megan had millions of dollars in net worth just 24 hours ago. Now she could not even buy a cup of coffee with a card. Megan dumped the contents of her expensive designer handbag onto the leather passenger seat. She frantically counted the crumpled paper bills she kept for valet tips and emergency cash. $340. That was the entire sum total of her remaining liquid wealth. She could not call her wealthy friends. The news of Apex Innovations collapsing and Aaron's public arrest was already spreading like wildfire through their elite social circles. She was entirely toxic. Terrified that the repossession agents were actively tracking her luxury vehicle, she drove erratically to the deepest, most impoverished outskirts of the city. She pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of a decaying roadside motel, a place that strictly accepted cash and asked absolutely no questions. The woman who had proudly worn custom beige suits and turned her nose up at my perfectly clean, sturdy home was now forced to hand over her last few crumpled bills to a bored clerk behind bulletproof glass. Megan unlocked the door to her ground floor room and stepped inside. The air was thick with the foul stench of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. The wallpaper was peeling aggressively from the damp walls, and a single flickering fluorescent bulb illuminated a stained, sagging mattress. She sat on the very edge of the terrible bed, clutching her designer bag to her chest, trembling violently in the cold room. This was her new kingdom. The brutal, unforgiving reality of absolute poverty had finally crashed down upon the woman who had mocked my working-class roots. The universe was delivering its punishment with flawless precision. Despite the catastrophic reality of their situation, their staggering arrogance refused to die completely. Aaron used his one allowed phone call from the federal detention center to contact Megan. He begged, pleaded, and manipulated her into helping him. Driven by a desperate, delusional hope that they could still magically reverse their fortunes, Megan took her diamond wedding ring, her expensive engagement band, and her diamond-encrusted watch to a shady pawn shop on the edge of town. She traded her most prized possessions for a fraction of their actual worth, gathering just enough dirty cash to secure the services of a predatory bail bondsman. Aaron walked out of the county jail 48 hours later. He was stripped of his tailored suits, wearing a cheap gray sweatshirt provided by the bondsman, looking completely haggard and thoroughly defeated. But instead of accepting his total ruin and preparing for his impending criminal trial, Aaron convinced Megan to double down on their absolute worst mistake. His mind, completely warped by greed and desperation, crafted a wildly delusional legal strategy. He believed that if they could successfully push the emergency conservatorship petition through the family court system, they could have me officially declared legally incompetent. In his twisted logic, if a judge ruled that I was suffering from severe advanced dementia, then the sworn confession he signed in my boardroom would be instantly invalidated due to coercion by a mentally unfit individual. Furthermore, as my appointed legal guardian, Aaron would theoretically gain total control over Crawford Holdings and all my assets, magically solving his criminal and financial problems in one single stroke. They took the absolute last remaining dollars from the pawn shop cash and hired a desperate low-tier attorney willing to file the motion blindly. They aggressively submitted the fraudulent psychiatric affidavit signed by Dr. Eris Thorne, completely ignoring the fact that Thorne was currently under severe federal investigation. They genuinely believed this was their brilliant masterstroke, their ultimate trump card. They thought they could still manipulate the judicial system to steal my entire empire right out from under me. They were furiously paddling in the middle of an ocean, completely unaware they were already tied to an anchor. The morning of the emergency conservatorship hearing arrived with heavy gray clouds blocking out the sun. The sterile wood-paneled courtroom was completely silent. Aaron and Megan sat rigidly at the petitioner's table, looking disheveled and exhausted, but wildly, dangerously hopeful. They kept glancing back at the heavy wooden doors, waiting for their grand salvation to walk through. I sat directly across the aisle at the respondent's table, wearing my pristine charcoal suit, with Harper Quinn sitting calmly by my side. She casually sorted through a thick stack of undeniable financial and medical evidence, projecting total absolute confidence. The presiding judge, an older, stern-faced man with zero tolerance for frivolous litigation, banged his gavel and demanded Aaron present his primary medical witness to support the severe claims of my alleged dementia. Aaron stood up confidently and called for Dr. Eris Thorne to take the stand. Absolute silence filled the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors did not open. Aaron swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. He called for his former corporate vice presidents, the men he had bribed to testify about my supposed erratic and aggressive behavior at his office. Again, total suffocating silence. Not a single person walked through the doors. The FBI was actively tearing through Thorne's clinic and interrogating anyone connected to Aaron's massive commercial fraud. His paid witnesses had completely abandoned him, terrified of perjuring themselves and facing federal prison time just to help a ruined man. Aaron stood completely alone in the center of the vast courtroom, exposed, undefended, and thoroughly destroyed. Aaron's bargain basement attorney, a sweating, nervous man named Higgins, frantically scrambled to salvage the catastrophic hearing. With his star medical witness missing and zero corroborating testimony to support their wild claims, Higgins resorted to the absolute lowest, most desperate legal strategy imaginable. He approached the judge's bench, nervously adjusting his cheap tie, and launched into a highly offensive, barely veiled character assassination. "Your Honor," Higgins stammered, gesturing wildly toward where I sat, "we must look at the objective socio-economic realities of this situation. My client's father is a 69-year-old former manual laborer. He spent his entire life doing basic carpentry and pouring concrete. It is entirely inconceivable that a man of his specific demographic background and limited formal education could independently amass, let alone comprehend, a commercial real estate portfolio worth hundreds of millions of dollars." Higgins paced back and forth across the courtroom floor, actively leaning into deeply entrenched prejudices to mask his total lack of evidence. The sheer complexity of Crawford Holdings requires an elite financial pedigree, something the respondent simply does not possess. This massive wealth accumulation is clearly a result of blind luck or malicious outside manipulation, which he is now too mentally fragile to manage. He is an elderly black man who is clearly confused about the magnitude of the assets currently under his nominal control. My client, a sophisticated technology CEO, is simply trying to protect this estate from predators who might take advantage of his father's obvious lack of financial literacy and severe cognitive decline. The dog whistles were so incredibly loud they were practically deafening. I sat perfectly still at the respondent's table, my hands folded neatly in front of me, quietly listening to this pathetic display of institutional bigotry. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not let the blistering rage show on my face. For my entire life, I had navigated this exact brand of insidious prejudice. I had endured site foremen who assumed I could not read a blueprint, bankers who refused to approve my initial commercial loans without exorbitant interest rates, and a society that constantly expected me to fail. Now, decades later, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than Higgins's entire vehicle, I was still being reduced to a helpless, uneducated stereotype simply because of my age and the color of my skin. It was profoundly absurd. I looked across the aisle at Aaron. He was staring at the floor, too cowardly to meet my eyes, while his lawyer actively degraded my humanity just to steal my money. He was relying on the very same racist assumptions his wife Megan harbored, hoping the judge would automatically agree that a wealthy, successful black man was a blatant impossibility that required white-collar correction. They truly believed their elite status granted them absolute ownership over my lifetime of labor. I felt a deep, chilling sense of calm wash over me. Their heavy reliance on these ugly, outdated stereotypes was not a weapon against me. It was their ultimate fatal vulnerability. They were blindly stepping into a massive legal minefield, completely unaware of the devastating artillery Harper Quinn was about to unleash. Harper Quinn slowly stood up from her leather chair, her expression radiating absolute lethal professional disgust. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She smoothly picked up a massive, heavy cardboard box from the floor and dropped it loudly onto the center of the counsel table. The heavy thud echoed sharply through the quiet courtroom, instantly silencing Higgins's pathetic rambling. "Your Honor," Harper began, her voice slicing through the air with surgical precision. "What opposing counsel has just presented is not a legal argument. It is a desperate, racist fairy tale designed to cover up a massive documented felony. My client does not suffer from cognitive decline, nor is he a lucky, uneducated beneficiary of outside manipulation. Harper began aggressively pulling thick, meticulously organized binders from the box, slamming them down one by one for the judge to see. I am submitting into evidence 20 consecutive years of immaculate federal and state tax returns, all filed and personally signed by Garrett Crawford. I am submitting over 50 certified independent audit reports of Crawford Holdings detailing my client's direct daily executive oversight of multi-million-dollar commercial acquisitions, aggressive corporate restructuring, and complex asset management. She pulled out a projector tablet and instantly cast a complex financial timeline onto the courtroom monitors. Furthermore, Your Honor, here is the direct email correspondence, the recorded board meeting minutes, and the certified wire transfer authorizations proving that Garrett Crawford single-handedly orchestrated the hostile takeover and subsequent revitalization of 7 major downtown commercial properties just in the last 36 months. He is not a figurehead. He is the sole architect, the primary shareholder, and the undisputed mastermind behind an empire that dwarfs the petitioner's bankrupt tech company by several orders of magnitude. The judge, an older man with a sharp eye for hard facts, scrutinized the projected documents with intense interest. He flipped through the executive summaries Harper had just handed to the bailiff. Higgins turned a sickly shade of gray, physically shrinking behind his podium as the sheer, undeniable weight of my corporate dominance crushed his entire bigoted narrative into fine dust. Harper did not stop there. Finally, Your Honor. Harper declared, her voice rising to deliver the final lethal blow. I submit the results of a comprehensive cognitive and psychiatric evaluation conducted just 3 days ago by Dr. Evelyn Moore, the leading forensic psychiatrist in this state. The evaluation confirms that Garrett Crawford possesses an exceptional cognitive baseline, functioning at an executive level far exceeding the average standard. The petitioner's entire case is built on a fabricated medical diagnosis from a corrupt doctor who is currently under active federal investigation for profound healthcare fraud. Aaron physically slumped in his chair, hiding his face in his trembling hands as the total annihilation of his character, his legal strategy, and his future was permanently entered into the public record. The presiding judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel down with a sharp, explosive crack that made Aaron physically jump in his seat. The judge's face was flushed with fierce, righteous anger as he glared down at the petitioner's table. I have heard enough of this absolute farce, the judge thundered, his voice echoing fiercely across the sterile room. This court has zero tolerance for individuals who attempt to weaponize the legal system to execute fraudulent financial thefts against their own family members. The petition for emergency conservatorship is immediately denied with extreme prejudice. But the judge was absolutely not finished. He picked up the fraudulent medical affidavit bearing Dr. Thorne's disgraced signature and the forged commercial loan documents Aaron had previously signed in my boardroom. Furthermore, the judge continued, his tone turning dangerously cold. The blatant forgery and perjury presented in this courtroom today are an egregious insult to the justice system. I am officially ordering the bailiff to impound every single document submitted by the petitioner. I am transferring this entire case file directly to the District Attorney's Criminal Prosecution Division with a strong personal recommendation for immediate indictment. Mr. Aaron Crawford, you came into my courtroom attempting to strip a highly competent, brilliant man of his civil liberties. Instead, you have successfully handed the federal prosecutors all the evidence they need to put you in a penitentiary. Aaron let out a quiet, broken sob, the horrifying reality of a lengthy prison sentence finally crushing his soul. He had dug his own grave and the judge had just happily pushed him in. I walked out of the massive double doors of the federal courthouse, the crisp afternoon air filling my lungs with the sweet, undeniable taste of absolute victory. Harper Quinn walked briskly beside me, her leather briefcase securely holding the official court transcripts that had just permanently sealed my son's fate. We descended the wide marble steps toward the reserved loading zone where my private driver Marcus had the engine of my midnight black Rolls-Royce idling quietly. I stepped off the curb and reached for the polished silver door handle. Suddenly, a chaotic blur of motion erupted from behind a thick concrete pillar. Aaron lunged aggressively into the busy street, completely disregarding the oncoming traffic. He threw his entire body weight against the heavy chrome grille of the Rolls-Royce, his hands slapping violently against the pristine hood. Marcus instantly slammed on the brakes, the heavy tires screeching sharply against the pavement. Aaron scrambled around to the passenger side, his face pressed desperately against the dark-tinted window. He was completely out of his mind with pure, unfiltered panic. The tailored suit he wore into the courtroom was heavily wrinkled and soaked in cold, nervous sweat. He pounded his fists against the reinforced glass, screaming my name over the low hum of the engine. He looked exactly like a cornered rat realizing the trap had finally snapped shut. I sat comfortably in the plush leather back seat watching his pathetic display of desperation without a single ounce of empathy. As I stared through the tinted glass at his tear-streaked, terrified face, a sudden sharp wave of memory washed over me. I did not see the 36-year-old corporate criminal begging for his life. Instead, my mind drifted back 3 decades to a tiny, cramped apartment with peeling wallpaper and a squeaky wooden floor. I saw a chubby-cheeked toddler with bright, curious eyes gripping my massive calloused index finger with all his microscopic strength. I remembered the exact feeling of his tiny hand wrapping around mine as I patiently taught him how to take his very first unsteady steps. I had spent countless hours hunched over my back, aching terribly from a long day at the construction site, cheering him on as he waddled across the tiny living room. I had built my entire life, my entire empire, solely to ensure that little boy would never have to struggle the way I did. I wanted him to walk tall and proud. But looking at the frantic, broken man violently hammering his fists against my car window, I realized with absolute chilling clarity that the innocent little boy I had nurtured was completely gone. He had not just grown up, he had been thoroughly consumed and destroyed by his own relentless greed. The child I loved so fiercely had died a long time ago, replaced by a ruthless stranger who viewed his own father as nothing more than a disposable stepping stone to wealth. Marcus glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his hand hovering over the security communications panel to call the armed courthouse guards. I shook my head slowly, signaling him to wait. I pressed the silver button on the armrest. The thick, tinted window rolled down with a smooth, mechanical hum, exposing me directly to Aaron's chaotic, frantic energy. "Dad, please!" Aaron sobbed aggressively, grabbing the edge of the window frame with his shaking fingers. "You have to listen to me. The judge is handing the files over to the district attorney right now. The federal prosecutors are going to issue a felony arrest warrant before the sun goes down. They are going to lock me in a maximum security penitentiary for years." He was completely hyperventilating, tears and snot mixing on his face in a thoroughly humiliating public display. I know I messed up. I know I was greedy and stupid and arrogant, but I am still your son. I share your blood. You cannot just sit there and let them destroy my entire life. I am begging you on my bare hands and knees. Just give me $50,000. That is absolutely nothing to you now. It is pocket change for Crawford Holdings. Just wire me a small fraction of cash so I can hire a discreet driver and cross the southern border tonight. I will disappear completely. I will change my name and you will never ever see me again. I just need a single chance to start over somewhere else. Please, Dad, save me. He was aggressively weaponizing the very concept of fatherhood, desperately trying to milk the last remaining drops of paternal obligation he thought I possessed. He genuinely believed that despite the immense psychological torture he had inflicted upon me, the biological tie between us would magically force me to finance his international flight from justice. I looked at his hands gripping my car, noticing his expensive watch, a luxury item bought with money he did not actually have. I let his desperate sobbing fill the air for a long, heavy moment. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, terrifying finality that cut through the noise of the busy city street like a surgeon's scalpel. "You have absolutely no right to call me your father," I stated, my voice devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "You forfeited that privilege the exact moment you let a corrupt doctor into my sanctuary to strip away my basic human dignity. You did not care about my life when you forged my signature. You did not care about my mind when you plotted to lock me inside a heavily medicated psychiatric ward just to drain my retirement accounts. You deliberately tried to erase my existence. The son I loved and sacrificed everything for is dead. You killed the son inside me the night you tried to lock me in a madhouse. Now you are just a common criminal begging a wealthy stranger to fund your escape." Aaron's eyes widened in absolute sheer horror as the devastating finality of my words physically struck him. The last flickering ember of hope in his chest was instantly extinguished. I pressed the silver button again. The heavy tinted window smoothly rolled up, forcefully pushing his trembling fingers off the glass. "Drive, Marcus," I commanded quietly. The massive V12 engine purred to life, and the heavy black Rolls-Royce surged forward, seamlessly merging into the afternoon traffic. I did not look back a single time. I left him standing entirely alone in the middle of the street, completely abandoned to face the brutal consequences of his own monumental arrogance. The universe, however, was absolutely not finished dismantling Aaron Crawford. Later that exact same afternoon, Aaron retreated to the filthy, dilapidated motel room Megan had previously secured on the impoverished outskirts of town. He walked through the rotting door, expecting to find his wife, hoping to somehow strategize their impending criminal defense. Instead, he found an entirely empty room. Her luxury luggage was completely gone. Resting squarely on the center of the stained mattress was a thick manila envelope delivered by a premium legal courier. Aaron tore it open with shaking hands. It was a formal, aggressively expedited petition for divorce. Megan had officially filed the paperwork, citing irreconcilable differences and extreme financial misconduct. Attached to the divorce decree was a brutal legal addendum completely severing her from his personal legal liabilities, leaving him to solely shoulder the crushing weight of the massive corporate debts, the fraudulent loans, and the impending federal criminal charges. She had completely vanished, leaving him with absolutely nothing but a cheap motel key and the terrifying wait for the police sirens to arrive. The immediate aftermath of Aaron's total destruction left a highly lucrative vacuum in the corporate technology sector. I did not simply lock the heavy glass doors of Apex Innovations and let their expensive proprietary servers gather dust in the dark. I am a ruthless businessman, and I recognize prime, salvageable assets when I see them. Within 48 hours of legally seizing total control of the company, Harper Quinn and I orchestrated a fierce, highly confidential bidding war for Aaron's core software algorithms. I bypassed the standard venture capitalist vultures and went directly to Aaron's absolute biggest, most aggressive market competitor. They had spent the last 3 years fiercely battling my son for elite corporate contracts, harboring a deep mutual corporate hatred. When I offered them the exclusive, unmitigated right to purchase Apex's entire source code client lists and physical operational infrastructure, they leapt at the opportunity like starving wolves. The ensuing negotiation was incredibly brief and brutally efficient. I sold the bleeding, gutted remains of my son's arrogant tech empire for a staggering $45 million in liquid cash. The competitor gleefully absorbed the advanced technology, immediately rebranding it and entirely erasing the Apex Innovations name from the corporate registry forever. Every single trace of his fake genius was scrubbed from the internet, replaced by the logo of the very rival he despised. Aaron's legacy was officially liquidated, monetized, and permanently deleted from the industry he so desperately wanted to rule. I had absolutely no desire to hoard that newly acquired corporate wealth in a stagnant offshore account. The $45 million represented the toxic culmination of my son's relentless greed and unchecked arrogance. I needed to fundamentally purify that blood money by channeling it into something profoundly meaningful and desperately needed within the community. I officially established the Crawford Vanguard Initiative, a comprehensive private venture capital fund specifically designed to exclusively finance, mentor, and elevate disadvantaged African American youth who possessed raw entrepreneurial brilliance but lacked the institutional access to secure traditional banking capital. To serve as the beating heart of this new philanthropic empire, I did not lease a sleek downtown high-rise. Instead, I returned to the very same modest, single-story property Aaron and Megan had so viciously tried to evict me from just weeks ago. I hired a top-tier architectural firm to completely gut and renovate the old structure. We heavily reinforced the sturdy bones I had built with my own hands decades ago, seamlessly transforming the humble residential space into a breathtaking, state-of-the-art corporate incubator. The cramped kitchen, where Megan had violently slammed that eviction notice on my table, was aggressively replaced by a sprawling, high-tech collaborative workspace equipped with top-tier fiber optic networks. The property that my son arrogantly deemed worthless dead capital was now officially the premier, heavily funded launchpad for the next generation of Black excellence. The sudden aggressive launch of the Crawford Vanguard Initiative sent massive shockwaves through the local financial sectors and the broader metropolitan community. I strictly mandated that my identity remain completely anonymous to the public and the relentless media cycle. I had zero interest in conducting flashy press conferences, cutting oversized ceremonial ribbons, or seeing my face plastered across the covers of pretentious business magazines. The aggressive journalists and hungry financial bloggers worked tirelessly to unmask the mysterious phantom billionaire pumping tens of millions of dollars into the city's most neglected, underfunded neighborhoods. However, HarperQuinn's impenetrable legal firewalls and complex blind trusts kept my name entirely out of the headlines. The press enthusiastically dubbed me the phantom philanthropist, running daily speculative features on the massive cultural and economic shift occurring within the local startup ecosystem. Without the heavy burden of public vanity, I was able to focus entirely on the raw, unfiltered impact of the work. The Vanguard Initiative did not just blindly hand out blank checks to anyone with a business pitch. We aggressively demanded rigorous business plans, relentless dedication, and a steadfast commitment to community uplift. Within the first 6 months of operation, my foundation fully funded and launched over 24 highly innovative minority-owned startups. We provided crucial seed capital to brilliant young Black women developing sustainable, clean energy solutions, and we funded revolutionary logistics software created by brilliant teenagers from the city's most impoverished red-line districts. I sat quietly in my private glass-walled office at the back of the renovated headquarters, carefully reviewing quarterly profit margins and expansion proposals from young CEOs who had previously been systematically denied business loans by every major bank in the state. I watched these fiercely determined kids who had grown up surrounded by systemic barriers and crushing poverty completely transform into polished, highly capable corporate leaders. They were fiercely navigating complex supply chain issues, securing massive vendor contracts, and aggressively scaling their operations with a level of undeniable integrity and profound humility that Aaron had never possessed for a single second of his miserable life. The initiative was actively breaking generational curses, creating massive sustainable wealth that would echo through these marginalized communities for decades to come. I was no longer just a retired carpenter holding onto a secret real estate portfolio. I was actively engineering a massive economic revolution utilizing the exact same financial leverage my son had tried to use to destroy me. Every single success story that walked through the doors of the Crawford Vanguard Initiative was a distinct, incredibly satisfying victory over the toxic, arrogant elitism that had poisoned my own flesh and blood. During a grueling third-quarter pitch session, a specific applicant walked into the main presentation room and instantly commanded my absolute undivided attention. His name was Deshaun, a 22-year-old orphaned young man who had spent his entire childhood aggressively bouncing between unforgiving, underfunded state foster homes. He stood before the executive investment panel wearing a slightly oversized, clearly second-hand suit, gripping a worn leather binder with white-knuckled intensity. But it was not his modest presentation or his lack of polished corporate vocabulary that caught my eye. It was the fierce, burning, undeniable hunger radiating from his intense gaze. When he passionately outlined his highly innovative blueprint for a localized agricultural distribution network designed to permanently eradicate urban food deserts, I saw a raw, uncorrupted brilliance that instantly resonated deep within my soul. He possessed the exact same relentless, hungry drive I had when I poured my very first concrete foundation 30 years ago. He did not want a massive handout to buy luxury cars or project a fake elite lifestyle on social media. He desperately wanted to build something permanent, something that genuinely mattered to the people suffering around him. As he concluded his presentation, staring fiercely at the panel of strict investors, I made an immediate unilateral executive decision. I instructed HarperQuinn to bypass the standard secondary review phase and approve his total funding immediately, but with one highly specific, non-negotiable condition attached to the capital. Deshaun would not just receive a massive check from the foundation. I was going to pull him directly under my wing, reveal my true identity to him, and personally mentor him. I was going to teach this orphaned young man how to truly build an ethical, unbreakable empire. Exactly 24 hours before his formal transfer to a minimum security federal penitentiary to begin his 4-year sentence, I received an unexpected urgent notification from HarperQuinn. Aaron had officially submitted a formal visitation request through his court-appointed public defender. He was currently being held at the county detention center, permanently stripped of his bail privileges after his desperate final attempts to manipulate the legal system had spectacularly failed. The federal judge had shown absolutely zero leniency during the sentencing phase, slamming him with 4 consecutive years for felony wire fraud, aggressive identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. Megan, remaining completely true to her viciously self-serving nature, had already finalized the expedited divorce proceedings, legally severing all ties and leaving him entirely isolated to face the crushing reality of a federal prison cell alone. I sat in my expansive executive office at the Crawford Vanguard Initiative, looking down at the official visitation approval form resting on my polished desk. For a long, quiet moment, I heavily considered declining the request entirely. I owed that ruined man absolutely nothing. He had actively tried to erase my existence, strip away my civil rights, and lock me inside a psychiatric ward just to fund his fraudulent tech empire. But a deeper, colder part of my mind realized that this final confrontation was the necessary closing chapter to this miserable saga. I needed to look him directly in the eye one last time, not as a grieving, disappointed father, but as the ruthless architect of his absolute and total ruin. I instructed Harper to immediately confirm the appointment. I ordered Marcus to prepare the car, leaving the bustling, vibrant energy of my new startup incubator behind for the sterile, heavily fortified concrete walls of the county jail. The atmosphere inside the sprawling visitors center was suffocatingly bleak, filled with the harsh, unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights and the sharp metallic echoes of heavy steel doors violently slamming shut. I was closely escorted by an armed corrections officer down a long gray corridor to a small, heavily monitored visitation booth separated by a thick, smudged pane of bulletproof plexiglass. I sat down carefully on the uncomfortable round metal stool, smoothing out the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit, projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable calm. A heavy reinforced door opened on the opposite side of the glass partition, and two stern guards led Aaron into the cramped booth. The physical transformation of my son was absolutely staggering. The incredibly arrogant, highly polished tech executive who used to strut proudly through massive glass lobbies in custom Navy suits had completely evaporated into thin air. In his place sat a hollow, visibly trembling, heavily broken shell of a man. Aaron was wearing a faded, oversized, bright orange county jumpsuit that hung loosely off his dramatically thinned frame. His once expensive, pristine haircut had grown out into an unkempt, messy tangle, and deep, dark purple bags stained the pale skin under his sunken, exhausted eyes. His hands, which had once so arrogantly forged my signature on multi-million-dollar corporate loan documents, were now tightly cuffed in heavy iron chains resting awkwardly on his lap. He sat down heavily on the metal stool opposite me, his posture entirely defeated. His shoulders slumped forward in profound public humiliation. The sheer, overwhelming reality of his impending 4-year federal prison sentence had completely shattered his massive, inflated ego into fine dust. He slowly looked up at me, his eyes heavily bloodshot and brimming with pathetic, desperate tears, finally realizing the absolute cold finality of his disastrous situation. We stared at each other through the thick, scratched plexiglass for a long, incredibly heavy minute. I did not immediately pick up the black plastic telephone receiver resting on the concrete wall. I let the agonizing, suffocating silence stretch intentionally, forcing him to make the very first move, forcing him to actively confront the colossal magnitude of his own total destruction. Aaron finally reached forward with violently shaking hands, lifting the heavy receiver to his ear. I picked up my end, holding it loosely, my face a rigid mask of pure, hardened stone. "Dad." Aaron croaked, his voice a raw, jagged, pathetic whisper that sounded as if he had been screaming alone in his cell for days. "Thank you for coming today. I honestly did not know if you would actually show up." I did not offer a polite greeting. I did not ask how he was holding up in the brutal detention center. I simply waited in complete silence, letting my icy demeanor crush any lingering delusion he might have secretly harbored about a last-minute paternal rescue. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as a fresh tear spilled over his hollow cheek. He pressed his free, trembling hand flat against the cold, dividing glass, desperately seeking a physical connection that was permanently severed. "I leave for the federal facility tomorrow morning." Aaron continued, his voice cracking with pure, unfiltered despair. "Megan took absolutely everything she could legally hide. She finalized the divorce, liquidated our shared accounts, and completely changed her phone number. The angry venture capital investors filed a massive, aggressive class action lawsuit to seize whatever future earnings I might ever potentially have. My entire life is completely over. I am going to be locked inside a concrete cage for 4 years, and I will come out a convicted felon with absolutely nothing to my name." He paused, wiping his running nose with the rough, scratchy sleeve of his orange jumpsuit. "But during all these agonizing weeks sitting in that freezing cell, I just keep thinking about one specific thing. I keep replaying that day in the boardroom over and over in my head until I feel like I am losing my mind. Aaron looked directly into my eyes, searching desperately for a single shred of hidden truth, a final answer to the terrible question actively torturing his ruined mind. Dad, did you ever actually plan to leave the company to me? If I had just waited, if I had not forged that commercial loan, were you ever going to pass that incredible multi-million-dollar empire down to your only son? I looked straight into his red, violently weeping eyes. I felt absolutely no pity, no lingering sorrow, and zero paternal guilt for the man sitting on the other side of that glass. This was the exact same person who had actively tried to throw me into a heavily medicated psychiatric ward just to steal my modest home to cover his gambling bets and corporate failures. He had willingly chosen dirty money over my sanity, and now he was aggressively demanding to know if he had accidentally thrown away the winning lottery ticket. I leaned slightly closer to the glass, my voice lowering to a chilling razor-sharp edge that carried through the plastic receiver with lethal precision. Aaron. I built Crawford Holdings from the absolute dirt up with the explicit singular goal of building a permanent, untouchable generational legacy for you, I stated coldly, watching the devastating truth strike him like a physical blow to the chest. But the true test of your character was never about how you handled millions of dollars in a fancy corporate boardroom. The ultimate test was how you treated the humble foundation I laid for you. If you had simply known how to cherish that little house, if you had respected the blood, sweat, and tears I poured into buying that small piece of land for your 18th birthday, this entire massive empire would have eventually been yours. You were the sole rightful heir to a fortune you could not even begin to comprehend. But your toxic arrogance, your disgusting elitism, and your unchecked malicious greed blinded you completely. You lost absolutely everything, not because I hid my wealth, but because of your own toxic, bottomless entitlement. Aaron let out a guttural, agonizing sob, dropping his head heavily against the thick plexiglass as the sheer, unfathomable scale of his colossal mistake finally broke his spirit completely. I placed the black receiver gently back onto the wall hook, severing our connection for the absolute last time. I stood up from the metal stool, adjusted my tailored suit jacket, and turned my back on the weeping, destroyed prisoner. I walked out of the sterile visitation room without a single backward glance, leaving Aaron Crawford permanently trapped in the miserable cage he had built with his own 2 hands. 2 full years passed since the heavy steel doors of the federal penitentiary locked Aaron away from civil society. I am now 71 years old, but as I stood behind the polished mahogany podium of the city's most prestigious grand ballroom, I felt more vibrant and powerful than I had in 3 decades. The Crawford Vanguard Initiative was hosting its 2nd annual gala, a massive, highly exclusive celebration of Black excellence and community economic empowerment. The sprawling venue was packed to absolute capacity. Hundreds of sharply dressed venture capitalists, civic leaders, and brilliant young entrepreneurs sat at the lavishly decorated tables, their faces turned toward the stage with profound, unshakable respect. This was not a crowd of arrogant vultures looking to strip assets from desperate tech founders. This was a powerful, unified community actively building generational wealth from the ground up. I adjusted the microphone, looking out over the sea of dedicated faces. The atmosphere was electric, completely devoid of the toxic elitism that had poisoned my son's tragic corporate circles. I had successfully transformed the dark, ugly greed that nearly destroyed my life into a blazing beacon of absolute, undeniable hope. I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the monumental reality of what my silent real estate empire had finally accomplished. The legacy I had once foolishly tried to hand to an ungrateful trader was now thriving and multiplying across the entire city, actively changing hundreds of lives. Before I could even begin my prepared keynote address, a sudden loud burst of applause erupted from the front row. Deshaun, the fiercely determined orphaned young man I had personally mentored, confidently walked up the carpeted steps onto the brightly lit stage. He was no longer wearing the oversized second-hand suit from his initial pitch meeting. He wore a crisp, sharp tuxedo, projecting the undeniable aura of a highly successful chief executive officer. His localized agricultural distribution network had not just succeeded, it had aggressively expanded across 3 different states, permanently eradicating dozens of urban food deserts and creating hundreds of high-paying jobs for marginalized youth. Deshaun approached the podium carrying a magnificent heavy glass award and a vibrant bouquet of fresh flowers. He handed them to me, his eyes shining with profound, raw gratitude. "Mr. Crawford." Deshaun spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing powerfully through the silent, attentive ballroom. "You did not just write a check to fund a business. You looked at a kid who had absolutely nothing, a kid the entire system had violently discarded, and you gave him the blueprint to build an unbreakable empire. You taught me that true power is never about crushing the people below you. It is about reaching down and pulling them up. You saved my life and you saved my community. The entire ballroom instantly rose to their feet, erupting into a deafening standing ovation that vibrated through the floorboards. I placed a firm, proud hand on Deshaun's shoulder, deeply moved by the incredible man he had become. He was the true son of my legacy, forged in the fires of hard work and absolute integrity. The thunderous applause eventually subsided, and the massive crowd took their seats, hanging on to every single word I was about to say. I looked down at the heavy glass award resting on the podium, and then out at the bright, hopeful faces of the young entrepreneurs. True wealth is an incredibly dangerous illusion. If it is not firmly anchored to an unshakable moral compass, I began, my voice carrying a deep, resonant authority across the silent ballroom. There was a time not so long ago when I watched the pursuit of money completely rot the soul of someone I loved unconditionally. I witnessed firsthand how blind, arrogant greed can transform a human being into a ruthless monster. I saw how the desperate desire for elite status and superficial power can aggressively blind people to the absolute most important things in life: family, dignity, and basic human decency. They chased an empty, shiny facade and happily destroyed the very people who loved them just to maintain a lie. I gripped the edges of the podium, letting the heavy weight of my past experiences fuel the absolute truth of my message. You are all sitting in this room tonight because you possess brilliant minds and relentless ambition. I continued, smoothly scanning the silent, attentive room. But let me give you the most valuable piece of commercial advice you will ever receive. Never, ever sacrifice your fundamental integrity to secure a seat at a table that does not respect your humanity. The corporate world is filled with hollow, desperate people who build massive paper castles on foundations of lies, theft, and exploitation. They believe their bank accounts make them untouchable gods, but a fortune built on betrayal is nothing but a heavily gilded cage. When the inevitable storms come, and they always do, those paper castles will violently collapse, and those people will be left with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of their own ruined reputations. I gestured toward Deshaun and the other successful founders sitting proudly in the front row. You are building something entirely different. You are building solid brick houses constructed with honest labor, mutual respect, and a fierce dedication to elevating the people around you. Remember that true, undeniable power is never measured by how many people you can ruthlessly step on to reach the top. It is measured by the strength of the foundation you lay for the next generation. Keep your hands clean, keep your hearts focused on the mission, and never let the toxic lure of easy money convince you to sell your soul. The ballroom erupted once again, this time with a roaring, passionate applause that completely shook the grand crystal chandeliers hanging high above. The gala was a massive, unprecedented success. Millions of dollars in new funding were actively pledged by inspired investors that night. The Crawford Vanguard Initiative had firmly cemented its place as a monumental, unstoppable force for economic justice in the city. I spent the next 2 hours shaking hands, reviewing brilliant new business proposals, and quietly observing the beautiful, powerful community I had helped build from the ashes of my own personal tragedy. Around midnight, the lavish event finally began to wind down. I exited the grand ballroom through the ornate private service corridor, taking a quiet shortcut toward the VIP valet parking garage where Marcus was waiting with the Rolls-Royce. The corridor was mostly empty, dimly lit by elegant wall sconces. Halfway down the hall, I noticed a catering service worker kneeling aggressively on the hard marble floor. She was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting black uniform, scrubbing furiously at a massive dark red wine stain that had soaked into the pristine white stone. As my polished leather dress shoes clicked rhythmically against the floor, the worker suddenly froze. She slowly lifted her head, a dirty, wet rag clutched tightly in her raw, trembling hands. The harsh overhead light caught her face perfectly. It was Megan. The intensely arrogant, fiercely elitist woman who had aggressively mocked my working-class roots and demanded I be thrown onto the freezing streets was now on her bare knees, scrubbing the floor of the very building I had rented for the night. Her face instantly drained of all color. Her eyes widened in absolute, sheer, horrifying humiliation as they locked directly onto mine. The crushing weight of her total, spectacular downfall crashed down upon her in a single, agonizing second. She quickly dropped her gaze, her face burning crimson with intense toxic shame, aggressively turning her head away to hide her tears. I did not break my stride. I did not offer a single word of gloating or a mocking smile. I simply walked right past her, leaving her kneeling in the dirty puddle of spilled wine. The heavy glass doors slid open and I stepped smoothly into the back of my waiting luxury vehicle. I sank back into the plush leather seat, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. The debts were fully paid. The traders were completely destroyed. Everything was finally perfectly settled. The greatest lesson we can take from this story is that true power never needs to announce itself. Aaron and Megan were so blinded by their own superficial arrogance and obsession with status that they completely underestimated the quiet strength of the man standing right in front of them. They mistakenly believed that kindness was a profound weakness and that a humble life equated to a lack of intelligence. But life has a unique way of balancing the scales. When you treat people as disposable stepping stones, you will eventually find yourself with absolutely no solid ground left to stand on, proving that genuine respect is the only true currency that lasts across generations. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences with toxic family dynamics in the comments below.